A whisper of death in every stroke. Armies rise in fumes and smoke. This is my war, my sacred dole. Paint the black, paint the gold. Bring the light to the grim and cold. The Emperor watches, don't you fold. Paint the black, paint the gold. Thousand points in crimson flame. Each a soldier, each a name. They bleed for glory, I bleed for art. The bolters gleam, the chainswords hum. In my head, their war begun. Piece by piece, I tear apart.
Yeah, buddy, here we are. We're back. We're still doing it. But we're going to be doing it without a face camera today, you guys. No face cam. We're just going to be doing a little painting. A little more of this. Hope everybody's doing well. Grab your snacks, your drinks. Thank you for being here, hanging out. Running a little late tonight. I don't know about Darktide a little bit later, but we're definitely going to get our paint on, listen to some stories from A Border Prince. And we'll see how the night takes us. Grab your snacks and drinks. Crack those drinks open, you guys. Yeah. Cheers. Gonna get that darker green on there, but I think they need another. Yeah, maybe one more coat, one more coat of the screen. Grab my other eyes. Yeah, buddy.
Puts a halo on a helmet when it's freshly full of lead. Got a river running rust red. Past a mountain made of teeth. Every ripple is a ride. Every bubble hides a grief. But the big red butcher just drums on his chair, humming out a warning to the smell in the air. Oh yeah!
All right, here you go.
Others. But Makarov was furiously insistent. His stubborn assault on the fortress-walled moorland had finally succeeded at the close of 773, and he was eager to press his advantage and drive on against Gore. To do so, he had to protect his flank and primary routes of supply. So he formally established a second front, designated the Corwood Assault, assigning Lords Militant to take command of it, requiring them to build their efforts against Sek on the ramshackle and spontaneous defence lines that had sprung up in response to the Khan group counterstrike. The fate of the crusade teetered at this point. Many thought failure was looming. Makarov had followed through on Slado's original promise and had cut his way through the Fortress Worlds into the Carcharodon cluster, pushing the forces of Gore into the back end of the Sabbat Worlds. The Saint, reborn, was now with him, and Imperial urgency reinvigorated. But Anarch Sek, hounding the flank of the advance, was a threat equal to, or perhaps even greater than the Gore.
51, what's up, dude?
Makarov's second front and lines
Thanks
of
for
support
rolling in, bro.
were in perilous state from the
Gonna
very
get a little
start.
pain time.
By the close of 775,
I don't
as
think
the
I'm going to be
Crusade
doing any
entered its
Dark
third
Tide
decade,
tonight. Just
Imperial
a heads
forces
up.
found themselves divided across two
But
lines,
get a little
warring
pain
almost
time, listen to
independently
some
of each
stories,
other.
chill
The
a
War
bit.
Master led the front edge, primary assault, towards the
Thanks,
Goreite
dude.
enemy,
Yeah.
and sent other senior officers to organise the flank
Got a couple of
repulse
beats
of
up in
the
here.
Anarch, the Corwood assault. The decision
But,
was bitterly
no camera
opposed,
either, no face
and it is
camera.
notable that perhaps
my cat.
showing evidence of
I'm pretty
his
sure it was my cat. It
mercurial
might have been me,
spite,
but
Makarov selected many of
might
the
have been a little bit of
dissenters for
both of us,
second
but we
front
messed up
command
the cable
Cyborg
to
in particular
my
was charged with unifying
for this
and
camera that you see right
strengthening
now.
the support and the
So I
flank.
ended up using my
It was a
face
task
camera
that he clearly
cable
despised.
for
Sources
the
close to
painting.
him report that he felt it was an insult to be sent back to mop
So
up
mad,
the
dude, look.
dirt. Qyburn, great lord of battles, felt his place should be at the front line of the advance. Qyburn, perhaps blinded by his own pride, considered Sek a secondary
dude,
danger
it's
at
ruined.
best, and still argued that the Crusade
ruined.
should turn collectively,
Tried
neutralise the
bending
Anarch
it back.
and
I
then
tried
return
being
to
all
face
careful
down
with
Gore
it. I just
in a
couldn't get
unified
it to
structure.
connect. And then I
In
used
a
my other
communique
camera cable
to
and
the
boom,
War Master,
boom, boom, worked
dated
just fine.
322-775.
The 10-foot
Qyburn
long
wrote,
gold
"Have I not killed enough
HDMI
for
to
you,
mini
my
HDMI
bloodthirsty lord?
is done
Will
for.
you unman me with this dismal janitorial
Yeah.
role? Must I be forced to
So,
follow your
yeah,
glory pace by pace?
Yeah, my cat can't
cleaning
hang out
up the
on the
debris
desk
you
anymore.
leave in your
You're
wake,
fired, bro.
while you grant trust
That's
in
all
lesser
good.
men
You know,
to pierce the
can't
enemy's
cry
hard
over
worlds.
spilt milk, even though I want to.
Makarov's answer was
But,
blunt.
you know,
In reply,
we
the
got
following
this little guy
day,
to help us out.
War Master simply sent the
And,
word.
you know, here we
Yes. By lesser men, Qyburn had made reference to Urians and Lemon Schultz, two of the rising stars in Makarov's command group. Urians
How are you
especially
doing,
had
dude?
distinguished himself
How's your
in
day
the
been?
assault on the Cabal systems. Qyburn resented that greatly. So did Marshal Blackwood, who, like Qyburn, surely had nothing left to prove. Makarov sent Blackwood to the rear, ordering him to secure the Rimwood line. "I would, sir, but there's nothing on the Rimwood line," Blackwood famously declared during a formal dinner. Makarov sent him anyway. A War Master is a War Master.
Yeah, dude, exactly.
One cannot pretend to understand the inner workings of the mind in such a great person. From the outside, it seemed that Makarov might have been favouring his new generals at the expense of tried and tested war leaders. One can certainly appreciate the resentment felt by Qyburn and Blackwood and their ilk.
Yeah.
More significantly, his bisection of the Crusade host
We'll be
risked
all
utter
right.
defeat. History would ultimately vindicate Makarov's decision. He had rightly judged that Gore and the Anarch to be two
I gotta
equally
start putting
pernicious
some, I
threats.
think I'm going to put
and if he
another
had left
coat
either
of this
unopposed,
same colored
imperial
green.
ruination would have followed. War on
And
two fronts
afterwards,
proved to be the only viable
we'll get the
recourse,
dark green
but it would take
over
almost
with the
20
dry
years
brush.
to show proof of that necessity, and Makarov would be obliged to compromise several times to maintain stability. Commentators in this period debate at length as to how much Makarov was gambling
I
and
was
how
just
much
checking
was
if I
part
dropped
of
any of
his
my paints under
studied
the
long game.
table.
Some claim the War Master was foolishly bowing to internal politics and sending his elder commanders back to rake room for his new blood. Others more soberly maintain Makarov
dude, it
understood
happens.
precisely how dangerous and
I'm saying
pressing
right now,
the second
hell
front
yeah,
would
dude.
become. The War Master had never
I'm too drunk for Dark
underestimated
Tide tonight
the
too. Yeah,
genius
dude,
of
don't even trip.
Anaquana
I'm
Sek.
right there with you.
Perhaps he was sending
Yo,
these
Vietnamese,
brightest and
what's up,
best
dude?
back
Thanks
where
for
they
rolling
would
in,
do
bro.
most good.
No face camera.
It is
'cause
now a clear fact
messed
that
some stuff
at the
up
turn
over
of
here, but
775, the greatest
later,
threat to
later.
Imperial security in the Sabbat worlds came from the flank, and from the
3
forces
hours,
of Magistar
bro.
Anarch
You got this,
Sek.
G. I believe
The
in
second
you.
front of the Crusade, formed to begin with mainly by raw recruits and battered divisions, found itself pushed to the limit by Sek's forces. Qyburn and Blackwood tried to stiffen resolve, but the line generals saw the danger. Barthol von Voits,
Yeah?
one of the
Hell
other
yeah.
veteran Lords
what I
militants
like to hear,
redirected
dude.
to second front duties, wrote in a letter dated 356775,
Like to know that
"There
it's a
is
good time."
tent here on the second front, a weakness. Men turn, fall away, flee. I have not a single body of troops that has the proper spirit in it." Rumours also emerged of a new
Oh, and
threat.
51.
It became clear that Sek had raised a
If
fighting
you
force
get
of
a
his own to
chance,
rival the
can
Gor's
you
blood pact.
let me
Called
borrow
the Sons
later
of Sek,
on,
this
whenever you get a
host
chance, I guess?
clearly represented a challenge
Or let me know
as
where it's at.
monstrous as the
Your
bloody Pacted
pickaxe
armies.
with,
But other philosophies were developing in the
Silk
embattled
Touch.
imperial commands of the
I found
Second
I
Front.
found a couple of diamond
Ideas
spots
embraced by
I
Makarov
wanna
and perhaps
grab.
already factored into his scheme. The Anarch Sek was ambitious and had been passed over for the title of Archon, deferring to Urlach Gore. His Sons of Sek proved that
Oh, yeah,
ambition,
thanks, dude.
showing his
I
desire to both
appreciate that,
mimic
man.
and perhaps outshine the Gorite warlord.
Yeah, dude, we're here
It
just to
hinted
relax,
that Sek might
chill,
yet
have a good
desire to
time.
contest Urlach Gore's
No stress
preeminence
allowed.
as Archon. The archenemy had shown it was capable of acting in
Chilling.
discreet and independent operations. Imperial minds, and Ibram Gaunt was one of these, began to consider that, while it was fruitless to try to weaken the enemy host,
get a little
physically
freshy
by
going
breaking
and
it apart,
relax.
perhaps it might be broken in spirit. The Arcanite could yet be riven and neutered if a civil war between the Gore and the Anarch could be provoked. It would not be until Balmut,
You know what, bro? It was
circa
actually like
780,
on the verge
that
of
this
raining,
hope
it looked like
could
today.
finally be realized.
It was
The Anarch. As with so many
was, like,
of the archenemy's
overcast all
warlords,
day,
little is known
super
about the
cloudy.
background and origin of
But
Magister
then once that like
Sek,
lifted off,
known as
yeah,
the
it was
Anarch.
hot. It was
Indeed,
hot, blazing.
it is impossible
hotter
to
than the
determine
blazes over
with any
hell.
degree of certainty
But-
if this creature was human in origin.
Yeah, not that hot.
or
It was it
some
hit at like
form of
80,
demon made
80
manifest
something,
in flesh.
low 80s,
Sek
mid 80s.
was notorious
Bad vibes.
and
What's
rarely
up,
appeared
dude?
in person on the
Yo,
battlefield.
prayers.
It wasn't
prayers
until
go out,
Urdesh
my
in
man.
792 that any direct
I don't wanna say
contact
too
was
much,
made
but,
by
you know.
Imperial forces. First at Garapan Zone, where his gambits was thwarted by the cohorts of the Living Bearty. And then finally,
miracles
at the
happen.
island known as
Prayers
Fastness,
do help.
in the Straits of Eltath.
No,
Even
can't
then, his true likeness remains
Everything's
a
gonna
mystery,
be all
as
right,
reports of his
God willing,
appearance vary depending on the observer. The Anarch was clearly a powerful psyker,
Cowboys on the
and it is known he deployed slaved psychers, known as Ikets,
Most difficult.
and used
You
them
got
as
this, dude.
simplifying choirs to bolster his own power. It seems likely his psionic aura determined the way he was perceived. What is known for certain
Oh,
is the scope
wait, it's
of
an
his
axe?
ability.
Wait,
Though he
can
served
the
as a
axe
magister,
with
lieutenant,
Silk
to
Touch still
presiding
break
Arcanate overlords, he was without doubt one of
ore
the most dangerous
that you
warlords
can
faced during the Crusade.
Damn.
Perhaps even
I mean, if that's the
rivaling
case,
or
yeah.
surpassing
Well,
the likes
no,
of
I don't have.
Nadzibar
I don't need it.
or
Need
Urlach
it.
Gur.
I'd just like to
Well,
get
usually,
those ores out
among
of
the
that
forces of the
vein.
ruinous powers, Sek possessed great degrees of nuance and subtlety, using trickery, manipulation, and
switching
fear
out. All
as
right,
much
dude.
as brute military force.
Yeah, I told him to let me
He
know.
was, by all standards,
you
a
know,
brilliant tactical leader, a skill
ASAP
probably
or whenever-
enhanced by his
whenever he's able
psychonic
to.
gifts. Believed
you
to
know
be
what's
of
going on, any updates, but yeah,
Shaidamet
dude,
Kahan
if you know
clan
anything,
origins,
and you
Anakwana
notice if he
Sek
forgot to let me
could
know,
easily
yeah.
have claimed the
Remind
Arcanite
him, hey,
crown on several
don't for-
occasions.
don't forget to
However,
let, Buddy
his
know.
understanding of the overall strategic flow of the Crusade, which Edrico suggests matched that of Makarov himself, was far more finessed than that of
Yeah, yeah,
Urlach
no
Gur.
worries, dude. Yeah, just
and
right
post
over here,
Balhut, it was
all
Sek's
right,
decision to
kicking
side
that
with Gur
ass.
and serve him rather than
I'm
fully
just gonna do a
challenge
little
him for the
painting,
title
dude.
of Archon.
We
and
weren't
allowed the
gonna stream
archenemy to
tonight,
remain
but, you know,
robust and unified.
when you don't
Sek,
want
it
it
is
is when you
clear,
should push
saw that a
yourself,
war of
too.
succession would shatter
So
the
here
sanguinary
we are.
tribes more effectively
Wasn't really
than
feeling
the
it, but
Imperial
we're
Crusade.
here and
could.
we're doing it.
This long-term perception and willingness
But
to
as for
forego
Dark Tide, we're
personal
probably skipping on
advance in
Dark Tide. Probably gonna rain check that one. Maybe we'll get a couple
The
levels in
shimmering
on
emerald of
Thursday, but
Italy,
whoop,
nestled in the
Commercials.
foothill.
commercials. Or not. We're just not really feeling it tonight. But I mean, yeah. The same reason why you're probably not really feeling it tonight is the same reason why a little bit I'm not feeling it tonight. I'm just trying to stay busy over here. Pickaxe, my bad. All right, just making sure. Making sure. But that is a genuine question also. Can an axe with Silk Touch break ores with and keep them as Silk Touch? or only the pickaxe can do it. Yeah.
Gore in the Irenes War also betray Sek's fluid and versatile touch. The Anarch's allegiance to Archon Gore certainly preserved the sanguinary threat after Balhut, but it seems clear this alliance was born out of expediency and was perhaps never intended to be more than a temporary
Keep your mind off of
Whatever
stuff.
rationale had caused Sek to side with Gore, a rivalry always existed. Once this unraveled,
not much we can do
the
right
bond
now
that had made
for
the archenemy
pray.
host an unexpectedly formidable adversary became an anvil
Play some
from which it
Crimson
could be broken.
Desert, relax.
It is hard to discern when the
get some
alliance
good
began
rest
to break
so you can
down,
handle
or
the
for how
morning.
long Sek had harboured resentment and ambition. Edrico, in his monographs, postulates that it was Gore's brutal and unstinting attitude of absolute authority, unwilling to acknowledge or credit the vital participation of his Magistar Sek, which eventually caused Sek to break. Sek may have become disenchanted by Gore's leadership, or believed that now the crusade was properly engaged, it was time for him to take control. As early as 774, intelligence recovered during a covert mission to occupied Garion revealed that Sek was building his own elite troop force, the Sons of Sek, an army as well drilled as the Blood Pact, and designed along similar lines to approximate the rigour of the Astartes Militarum.
Bellatrix,
Though this could have
hello, here
easily
we are,
been
we're
a
doing it.
tactical
We're getting our
decision,
paint on.
or indeed an act of
No face
admiring
cam.
imitation.
Face cam
However,
later, but
by
alright,
780
there
and
we go.
81,
We
further
ruined-
critical
we ruined
intelligence
our-
revealed the possibility of a schism
camera cable.
and showed that Sek was operating largely to his own plan, sometimes contradicting or even ignoring
We'll be back
Gore's
before
efforts.
you know it. We're just
Sek,
switching out
the
this camera
evidence
for the other
revealed,
camera for
was
today.
power
Tomorrow
building for
when
his
we
own
get our
ends,
watch
and
party
undertaking
on,
the
and
development
we're
of
not
weapons
painting,
and
I'll switch
mechanisms
this camera
that
to my
would
face
both
again.
overwhelm the Imperial Crusade and remove any rivals from the Arcanite crown. This brewing feud, which had already triggered some flashpoints, was deliberately provoked through a campaign of subversion and lightning raids, most particularly at Salvation's Reach in 781, a mission conducted by Ibran Gaunt, who was a leading proponent of the plan to divide the enemy's commanders.
Mine diamond
Between
or
781
iron.
and Sek's
Bro,
death in
gold can't?
792,
Wow, that's
states
lame.
of open warfare broke
Yeah,
out
dude,
between
darn
the divisions of
titties.
the
Yeah, bro.
Archon and
I'm
the
pretty sure it was
Anarch,
my little
or
boy,
along
my little boy
Gorite
cat.
and Shedemet
Yeah.
Kahan clan
Well, he's
lines,
always here on the
fundamentally
desk when
weakening
I'm
the efficiency
streaming,
of
when
the
I'm doing
ruinous
stuff. He's
powers
hanging out on
in
the
both the
desk with
Irene
me,
zone and
you
along
know,
the
pretty
Khan
much
front.
wants to be a part of the show.
The most notable of these
And I always let him hang out, but,
internecine
like-
wars was, of course, the
And he
two-year
always like
conflict
climbs
in the
up, not
Vander
climbs,
Pi
but like he
systems.
stretches up and tries
By
to turn on
789,
my ceiling
having
fan
either
because the
been
little chain
brought
hangs
into
down.
line by the Archon,
You know, he's always
and
messing
acting out
around
of
right
urgency
here.
to demonstrate his loyalty,
Sometimes
or driven
he
by a
does,
desire to
he does,
consolidate his own power
get
and
his hands where the
resources.
cables are,
Sek
and
made
I always
an
shoo him off.
unprecedented strike
But
against the
sometimes, you know,
forward
he'll
front, with
get up
special
there, hey,
focus
get down.
on
He'll get down,
Urgesh
but
Forge World.
who
By
knows
his
what's going on when
previous
I'm
standards
sleeping, you
of
know?
genius, the assault was frantic and chaotic, leading many
yeah,
to
dude.
speculate
Seems
he was
like the
acting out
cable's
of
done
desperation or had suffered some
Can't get it
injury
to
or
work.
decline that had impaired his abilities. However, confidential sources suggest the old
hopefully-
genius remained intact and that Sek was pursuing,
I mean,
either for his
we're
own
gonna get it
ends or
addressed. I'm
at
just.
the bidding of Erlock Gur,
It sucks.
a
It
far
sucks
more
that he
complex
can't be up
and
here anymore
unorthodox
either.
goal than the simple acquisition
You're
of
done,
territory
boy.
and tactical success.
Your
At
time
Urdesh,
is up.
Sek's assault was finally met head-on by the War Master himself, and one of the greatest victories of the Crusade was achieved.
He back down, said, "Fuck that."
The sons
Yeah, dude.
of
That's how my
Sek.
girl cat is, dude. My little
The
boy cat, he'll
backbone of
run
the
out in the
Anarch's
rain
fighting
and he'll
host
run
was the
back and
sons of
forth
Sek,
like
raised upon
the
similar
sky is
principles,
falling, you know.
which is to say,
But little
upon the
girl,
pattern of
she'll,
formal Astra Militarum
she'll
models.
stand by the door.
to the
She'll be
Gauls'
excited to
blood
run
pact,
outside,
perhaps
and she'll like
in
get next to the
admiring
door. And when she
imitation.
sees that rain coming down,
Enjoying
she's
a
like,
formal structure
"Oh,
and
it's
high degrees of
raining."
discipline,
Yeah,
the
no, nobody
Sekite
told me it was
pack
raining.
sons were
I'm
fanatically
gonna pass.
devoted and well
And she
equipped.
turns around and goes back
Generally
in.
of
Or
larger
doesn't go back
build
in, but she just
than the
turns around
Bloodbath
and
warriors.
heads
They
deeper
wore
into the house.
uniforms of yellow or ochre, augmented by body
Oh, sorry.
armor and field kit
I gotta keep
plundered
the-
from guard units.
Keep it in frame.
A surprisingly high number
Gotta
of them,
remember to keep
more
it
even
in
than the blood pacted
frame.
themselves,
Correct.
were turncoats from other forces,
There it is,
including
there it is.
imperial deserters and disaffected members of the Gauls Pact. Their command and rank structure, as far as can be determined, was the equivalent of the Blood Pact, and indeed most formalised Arcanite armies.
Oh, no, no
High-ranking
worries,
commanders,
bro.
Eta Gauls,
We're actually
roughly
already
analogous to colonels
addressing
or
it. It's
generals,
just that it's not going to be
presided
here
over
until,
demigod officers, roughly approximating the rank of
hopefully
major,
tomorrow,
below which
but
served
you know how
Sidere
that
commanders or
But yeah,
high Sideres
where it's
captains
already
and
getting work done.
Sideres sergeants or squad leaders.
But thank you, dude. I appreciate
Veteran
it.
Paxons acting
no,
as
it's-
weapons masters, tribunes, and standard bearers.
It's rough. I almost canceled the
overall
stream and
discipline
then I
was
thought,
maintained
well, I
by,
can switch
the
this face. And nobody
quasi-daemonic
wants to see my face while we
exhibitors.
paint anyways, right?
Significant
So, yeah, no,
rivalry
we just
existed between the
we
Sekites
did
and
it.
the
We
Blood
did
Pact,
it. We're working on it.
though stringent enforcement of command allowed them to
And this
often
way I don't have to wear my
function
beanie.
alongside each other on the battlefield, vying to outdo each other in acts of barbarity.
I never have to wear my beanie,
Like
but
the Blood Pact,
it's just
no
it
true
gets in the
Sekite troop
way,
was
and
alike.
people are
But
here
they
looking
did
at me.
have
and
similarities. Each of
then
them
you
carried
get
a ritual
Delilah's
knife.
coming up around,
The sons of
wanting to
Sek
take my power
bore these
away,
blades, which
trying to
were
take the
used for
power
both
away from
hand-to-hand
Samson.
fighting and for ceremonial occult practices. Again, although they each carried one, none was the same, as they were not mass-produced, it seemed, and bore special
Dude, it's
spiritual
coming out pretty
significance to the
good.
wielder.
It's looking all right.
Libov, and other key theatres. The Crusades' controversial Second Front, formed primarily around the 5th, 8th and 9th Armies, faced ferocious opposition from the host commanded by the Anarch throughout the Khan group, even after the archenemy defeats on Khan Free and Anothis, and the eradication of Magister Inokente at Herodor. Sek's savage counterstrike had been partially repulsed, but his forces dug in well and held ground, guided by his tenacious tactical skill, and forced the Corwood Imperials to open battle. Several of Makarov's most senior commanders had been sent back to oversee the prosecution of the Second Front, including General von Voits, Kelso, Bulletin, and Lusham, Lords Militant Kyborn and Hummel, and Marshal Blackwood. For the most part, their task was to block and defend against the continuing counterattack, but this often meant they had to retake strongly held enemy worlds that Makarov had bypassed on his way to
So
glory.
weather really nice
Left
right now,
unmolested,
too.
these worlds could form powerful beachheads and
Not-
staging
no, dude, it's
posts
nice.
for
It's
the
nice.
counter-attacking foe.
Yeah.
Some of the bloodiest and most
Mid
vital
to high
wars of the entire
70s.
crusade
On the
took
warm
place
side,
in
it
this
gets to like
period.
mid-80s
And the
lately,
theatres
but
of that campaign
we haven't
read
hit
as a roll
90s yet,
call
so
of imperial
I'm
heroism
chilling.
and endeavour.
Anytime it hits
The
90s, I'm
hives
just
of
like, dude,
Orestes,
anything 90 and up,
the
I'm just
glass
like, nah, dude.
beaches of Khorasan, the black glaciers of Lysander, the high Sierra forests of Khan Nobilis, and the steppe cities of Ancrion Sextus. Most massive of all, perhaps, was the momentous invasion of Libov, now regarded as an exemplary textbook illustration of imperial tactics, though at the time the performance of the theatre commander Karnhide was tragically unappreciated. Loten and Tarnuga. Having emphatically blocked and crushed part of the Arcanate counterstrike at Loten at the very start of 774, the Crusade Fifth Army under General
shiniest bald head
Losham
ever? Yeah,
moved
exactly.
rapidly spinward to confront Anarch
98
Sex forces
Fahrenheit
on the
in
Agri world of
thunderstorm.
Tarnuga.
Yeah, no, I don't want that,
Rudi
dude. That's
Lusham
humid as
was
hell.
one of Makarov's favourite
I've been to
few,
Cancun,
a
and it
rare
was kind of
instance
like
of the
that.
War Master appointing one of his promising new
Vietnam's
blood
weather
commanders
is
to the
nasty
second
hot.
line.
Yeah, dude, I
The
bet.
fighting on Tarnuga was brief,
I
but
bet, bro.
utterly ferocious,
Yeah.
and
No-
Losham was
no
killed in a
fun.
rocket
Too
attack by
too tropical for
Hagmatan
my
sect
kind.
troops. His replacement, Colonel, later Lord Militant, Andred Call, led the 5th to victory, but was overlooked for permanent army command by the War Master, who instead passed the 5th group to Barthel von Voits. Call was dispatched to the primary front and eventually achieved appropriate, if belated, recognition and promotion during the Irenes assault. Van Thal. In retreat from Herodor, Inokente's forces, leaderless and in disarray, fell upon Van Thal and Lysander in late 774.
Yeah, I don't want to be that guy,
In
but
pursuit,
I think
and
I'm getting
assuming
better
they
at
were
painting you
broken,
guys.
Marshal Gantz launched an attack at Van Thal that resulted in the deaths of 3 million Astra Militarum guardsmen, the heaviest losses recorded on any one day during that phase of the crusade.
Oh, maybe not.
Gans took Van Thal in the
Got it
course
on
of the
his
next
eye.
month,
Damn it.
but was publicly
Have to fix that
chastised
again.
and later
Again.
executed by Makarov. He was replaced by
Thanks,
General,
dude.
later Marshal, Rand Hupert.
Painted
Lysander
over his eye right
and
now. It looks like
Khorasan.
he's winking.
Eager to prove her new position, Rand Hubert
Well,
achieved
actually,
2
now
critical
it
victories
looks
in
like he's,
rapid
like,
succession.
aiming
She
with the
purged the
gun.
remainder of Inokante's horde from the glacial
wait,
region of
hold on.
Lysander, where they
Get him
had
in the
gone to
camera
ground,
shot.
then mobilized rapidly to Khorasan, where she executed
not
a
focusing.
superb coastal assault against the capital, Korhel, breaking a vast, waste cult fraternity.
Come on.
Like Call, she might have expected greater recognition for these successes, but she had been one of Slado's chosen, and her force was charged instead with the occupation of Khan Nobilis, after Cyborn had retaken the world in
And he's showing his
776.
teeth too, so I
There,
gotta
the
get
division
that white,
saw no
like,
action,
the white in
and
there,
were
right,
finally
with his
retired
teeth.
to Balhut, and then sent to Prince
we're doing
Obamid
it.
in 778 during the Suppression. Rand Hupert's career idled for several years, though she returned to the primary front after 780 and saw action in the Carcharodon cluster.
Ah, 5
Tunusk.
here.
Occupying a position
Damn,
close
yeah,
to a
thanks,
vital
bro.
mendable point in warp space, Tunusk saw serious
Yeah,
and
we've been-
continuous action between
We've been
775
putting in
and
our
778.
hours.
By the end of the fighting,
Almost
the
every
world was virtually
Tuesday
burned
for a
out.
good minute
the
now.
campaign there came to an end with Marshal Blackwood's
I'd be a lot more
famous
pissed off if I
8-day
never did
offensive
get better.
against the
If I was
Blood
still
Pact
painting this
and
exact
allied
same that I did in the
Skelsyd
beginning. Oh,
coalitions.
dude. I
Libov.
probably would have given up a long time ago.
Although not appreciated at the time, the actions of General Karnhide on Libov
No,
have
don't
now
give
become
it up.
legendary
That's how you,
and are
that's how
regularly
you get
taught
better.
to
Get back
officer
on the
recruits
horse.
and neophytes across the Imperium as
Keep
part of the
going.
Tactica Imperialis, from which this account is now drawn. Libov, the Sabbath Worlds,
It's a good time. It's fun.
778
It's relaxing.
M41. By its 23rd year, the monumental Sabbath Worlds crusade was
Relaxing.
entering a defining phase. Under the mercurial command of the War Master Makarov, the main armies of the crusade had successfully advanced into the savagely disputed territories of the Cabal systems, a densely fortified and defended region, and was beginning to make significant gains in the Carcharodon cluster, a tract generally regarded as the heartland holdings of the archenemy. Many believe that overall Imperial victory was in sight, perhaps no more than 5 years off. However, others feared that a number of factors could unsettle the Imperial confidence, possibly with disastrous effect, more than once. The fortunes of the Crusade had switched drastically against the Imperial side. There were two key considerations. Firstly, the fighting in the Cabal and Carcharodon regions were on such a scale previously unseen, even in a long crusade that had witnessed massive set-piece battles. Secondly, and more insidiously, there was unfinished business in Makarov's wake. The Khan Group, trailward of the Cabal systems, was still beset by enemy forces, many of them attempting to effect a counterattack. In his effort to race ahead, Makarov had left many unresolved conflicts to be dealt with by his second front. Conflicts that, if mishandled or lost, would allow significant archenemy forces to drive at the crusading forces from behind. From a history of the later Imperial Crusades, the account of the Libov War is taken from operational reports made during and after the action, a body of material later formalized and annotated by General Galan Galt in his book, A Strategic Assessment of the Khan Group Conflict 799 M41, which was later approved for inclusion in its charter list of recommended works by the Tactica Imperium. The Libov section has often been republished separately for academic study. Galt, at the time a junior officer, served under Karnhide at Libov, and later saw command at Sarnesia and Xerxes III. The editorial perspective is Galt's, and is reproduced here with minor amendments requested by Imperial Guard High Command. Begun in 755 M41, the Sabbath Worlds Crusade was a massive endeavor to liberate over 100 inhabited systems along the edge of the Segmentum Pacificus from the forces of chaos. An ancient and feudally held region, the Sabbath Worlds has an imperial history dating back many thousands of years, and in that time has been severely threatened and invaded by the enemies of mankind, most especially the feral chaos forces known to occupy the so-called sanguinary worlds, spinward of the inhabited sectors. Liberated early in their formal existence during the crusade led by Saint Sabbath, from whom the stars take their name, the worlds were extensively retaken by the enemy during the Sabbath incursions that began a century and a half prior to the crusade. Though many worlds held out during this troubled and dangerous period, by 740 M41, It was clear the region no longer retained any semblance of central imperial control, and a crusade-scale mobilization was prepared to retake them. Initially generated and led by the inspired command of War Master Slado, the crusade enjoyed vigorously early successes despite savage opposition, and the first phase culminated in the critical battle at Balhut, considered a turning point in the opening decade of the endeavour. However, the great Slado perished in the Balhut conflict. His named successor as War Master was the young, unproven but brilliant Makarov, who galvanized imperial interests with his positive, some might say impetuous leadership. For the second 10 years of the Crusade, Makarov drove his forces on through a remarkable series of engagements, eventually puncturing the monumental enemy defences of the Cabal system, which opened up the vital Carcharodon cluster and paved the way for the Crusade's third principal phase, when the Imperial armies confronted the archenemy forces in their own heartland. However, in the years immediately following 773 M41, the archenemy attempted a considerable counterattack, pincering behind the advancing Imperial front at Makarov's overstretched lines of supply and communication. The focus of this counterattack was the Khan Stars, a knot of old Imperial worlds and colonies adjacent to the Cabal systems, where Imperial governance of the region had once been situated. Action on this second front raged for many years, and many times Imperial forces hung in the balance. It was feared that Makarov's muscular gains to Spinwood would be for nothing if the counterattack succeeded in its objectives and bisected his advance at the Khan Stars. Tactical scholars believe that if Makarov's main force was decapitated in this way, nothing could prevent it from being surrounded, overwhelmed, and obliterated. Several of Makarov's senior commanders were charged with the prosecution of the Second Front, including Generals Van Voits, Kelsey, but this often meant they had to retake strongly held enemy worlds that Makarov had bypassed in his way to glory. Left unmolested, these worlds could form powerful beachheads and staging posts for counter-attacking foe. One of these worlds was Libov. First settled in the early historical period of the region, circa M36, Libov had grown to be a hive world of considerable power and manufacturing capacity. With a large population and significant guard and PDF garrisons, it had been one of the last to fall to the archenemy during the Sabbat incursions. Effectively conquered in 750 M41, Libov had suffered under archenemy occupation for 2.5 decades, though several hive cities had remained under Imperial control for good portions of that time, and major land wars had been waged as a result. Strategically useful due to its location on one of the main jump routes, Libov was also believed to be a source of fuel, munitions, and other consumables for the archenemy forces in the Khan group. Late in 777 M41, Lord Militant Kyborn ordered it to be retaken and gave command responsibility to General Karnhide. General Andreas Karnhide was a veteran guard commander with a long and respectable military career that predated the start of the Crusade. He had served under Slado during the Kulan Wars in 752 to 754 and had thus become one of the War Master's chosen command echelon at the start of hostilities. Prior to Libov, however, his service in the Crusade had been unspectacular, as circumstances found him most often in command of deployment garrisons or transit forces. After Balhut and Slado's death, Karnhide suffered the same fate as many of his contemporaries when he found himself out of favour with the new War Master. Makarov, with characteristic petulance, took it upon himself to give operational preferment to those he felt were his own, which is to say the new blood, the younger, often untested officers who had risen with him on the skirts of Slado's command. Many estimable veteran commanders, with nothing to prove in terms of loyalty and ability, were relegated unceremoniously to secondary roles. As a result, a great number of them were saddled with the onerous chores of second front command. Karnhide, born on Gudrun in 711, was consequently a capable officer who had never been given the opportunity to truly shine. He was well liked by the rank and file, and had an easy nature that seemed relaxed and could often be mistaken by detractors for timidity and indecisiveness. It must be said that his selection for the theatre command of Lybov was not made on merit. Overstretched and beset by 3 significant conflicts in the immediate Khan group, Lord Militant Kyborn had tasked the job of liberating Lybov to the only senior officer he felt he could spare. Similarly, Karnhide was not blessed with control of a well-formulated, well-ordered mission force. Though of decent size, his liberation army was thrown together at the last minute from disparate units, most of whom had not served alongside one another operationally, and many of which had been on frontline service for excessive duration and urgently required retirement and restating. It may be that Kyborn considered Karnhide and his force expendable, or Lybov to be less of a threat than it actually proved to be. Most likely, he regarded Karnhide's task force to be a stopgap, a competent but unexceptional commander with a tired, unstructured army, who would keep Lybov busy until such time as Kyborn was clear of his immediate problems and could come to claim victory for himself. Significant enemy forces awaited Karnhide on Lybov, especially in the so-called transcontinental nexus, where the bulk of the planet's most viable hives and manufacturing centers lay. Cult armies and levies of prodigious size occupied the zones, many of them drawn from the indigenous population, polluted by the caustic touch of the war. Those Imperial citizens who had not succumbed to the taint of chaos were cruelly employed as slave labor in the industrial belt. The archenemy forces were further supplemented by war machines, armor, aircraft, and battlefield titans, as well as some considerable numbers of traitor marines. Usually, such archenemy forces were stratified and uncoordinated, united by a common cause, but unharmonized in terms of command and control. Cohesion in archenemy armies is often weak or flawed, and rivalry, feuds, and internecine power struggles often erupt. What had begun to make the enemy so dangerous in the Sabbath worlds was a new unity of command. Though still clan and cult-centric in nature, the enemy forces recognized one senior overlord, or Archon, who was the equivalent of the Imperial War Master. The Archon, named Erlock Gur, had evidently claimed, by right of combat or ritual, the overlordship of the innumerable feral clans and factions. Other clan leaders, many monstrous potentates in their own rights, had become his lieutenants or magistars. For the first time, the archenemy was operating with one unified purpose, as much as any army of the ruinous powers can be said to do so. Central to Gower's harmonizing efforts was the Blood Pact. Realizing that true, methodical soldiering would win more for chaos than the rampant zealotry of berserk cultists, Gower had initiated the development of a personal clan army called the Blood Pact, which he modelled, sardonically, on the Imperial Guard. Indeed, many of those who took the Blood Pact with Gower found themselves equipped with weapons, kit, and uniform procured from dead or captured Imperial Guardsmen. This bastardized, almost parodic reflection of the Imperium's army proved to be highly successful once it had mastered the principles of proper disciplined warfare and tactics. The Blood Pact, and a comparable institution named the Sons of Sek, after one of Gower's most notorious magistars, was able to compete with the Guard on equal terms, to understand its methodology and turn it against the Imperial ground troops. The archenemy forces on Lybov were commanded by a being known as Arak Ettigur, a capable and charismatic leader. Imperial scholars believe that Ettigur is an honorific rank, meaning sub or demi-gur, donating perhaps a colonel or general analogue. Arak Ettigur had forged the disparate parts of the archenemy occupation force into one coherent structure. This new breed of Chaos Army awaited Karnhide's forces. Any successful liberation of Lybov had to focus on the transcontinental nexus, the vast and balkanized heartland of hives and industrial regions that occupied the southern half of the main landmass. 19 separate fronts for mass drop assault were considered and rejected by Karnhide and his planners, including Sredi Bay, Zinc Hill, and Kazanberg. Principal assault of Lybov Hive was deemed infeasible, so long as the other hives of the Nexus remained active and defensible. From the eyewitness account, Pilot Officer Gregor Helk's 33rd Kallian Air Wing. When we came up on Lybov, we were dropping in from 30,000 meters in a flat diamond formation of 25 machines. We had the main sun right behind us. Visibility was good, and we got a decent impression of the sheer scale of the main hive. The enemy was up and in force. I counted about 600 machines, mostly in dogfights with 29 and 672 squadrons. It was a massive air duel. Planes from 451 Squadron, Colonel Xerxes, piled in right past us on a steep dive, moving much faster and steeper than us. So we turned in and stood in our wings and peeled out to attack. The blessing of the Emperor was upon us. I had my guns on 2 before I had to turn up out of the dive, and crossed with a 3rd that I'm pretty certain I sent to hell. It was deadly work. Every curve and turn, every banking move or roll risked a collision with another craft, friend or foe. It was like shoals of fish racing and lapping around one another. The G was intense on every turn, and 5 times as many as the digits on my right hand. I evaded a fatal clash by a hair's breadth. I made 2 more good kills, both confirmed, on my way out, then struck to a trio of enemy fighter bombers, turning low and west, and sent one of them down. Then I found myself in a knife fight with an arch-enemy machine, a devil of a pilot, who rolled around the sky until most of my munition load was gone. I was low on fuel, and I didn't fix him. I lost him over the western transits. I think by then he may have bounced some of the thunderbolts of 29, but I didn't see it. Then I turned back for the carrier on the last dregs of my reserves. Most objections to the various drop-point plans were made by Karnhide's infantry commanders. Intelligencers had procured a great deal of useful data, suggesting the Nexus Zone enjoyed considerable air cover from the arch-enemy interceptor squadrons, based for the most part on mobile land carriers. These hunter-killer squadrons were hard to track and kill from orbit. Infantry force commanders reasoned that the fighter screen would render any troop drop practically suicidal, while the dense formations of enemy Stoop bombers would swiftly annihilate any forces that made it to the surface intact. This was especially true of the Sredi Bay landing zones that were Karnhide's particular preference. Karnhide bounced the problem to
Nice,
his naval
dude. I'm
officers,
actually probably gonna
initially with
rain
requests
check
to
DT
bring the
for the
landing
night.
fleet into a much tighter,
But I'll be here
lower
doing some
orbit,
painting
from which the carrier
handle some
machines could be
heretics.
more accurately targeted. Unwilling to risk their line ships and troop conveyances against the range of the arch-enemy's huge anti-orbital batteries, the Navy officers devised a scheme of their own. Realizing that a flat refusal to Karnhide might result in them being ordered into close orbit anyway, Flight Marshal Kerrol Hayden presented an attack plan to General Karnhide, whereby the Navy fighter squadrons would be deployed into the atmosphere in advance of the troop drop to engage the enemy aircraft head-to-head for air superiority. Such a bold tactic was ordinarily disliked by most commanders of the fleet, who resented wasting fighter craft by sending them in without orbital barrage support. However, the individual pilot officers, whose views were often overlooked, relished the notion of such a challenge, and in this theatre, the commanders of the major vessels preferred to gamble their fighters rather than their main ships. The plan was agreed. 8 massed waves of Imperial fighters, predominantly Thunderbolts but also some wings of Lightnings, began the assault at 0 hour on day 1. Almost 30,000 machines were sent in, and were matched at the height of the engagement by almost 45,000 enemy warplanes. Overall, 63,000 Imperial warplanes were committed to the campaign. The total number of arch-enemy machines is not known, but is estimated to be around 140,000. The principal attack zones were the Shredai Bay area, Bulk Cliff Hive, and the Zinc Hills region. The most intense of these initial air battles were fought at Shredai Bay on the first and third days of operation, and at Zinc Hill on day 4. As the air war entered its second week, a massive engagement lasting 9 hours engulfed the coastal zone of Bulk Cliff Hive. Later in the second week, more air battles cut across the coast at Shredai Bay North. And then, at the start of the third week, which was day 15, a final mass engagement took place southwest of Libov Hive itself. By that stage, arch-enemy air power had been reduced to about a third of its starting strength. Its wings clipped, Libov could no longer protect itself comprehensively from the air. It was now vulnerable to full-scale land assault. But after over 2 weeks of air combat, the arch-enemy knew what was coming. In the opening segment of the campaign, Karnhide had been required to mediate between the interests of the Imperial Guard and the Imperial Navy. Many of his command elites saw these difficulties as symptomatic of the unalloyed, unfocused nature of the task force Qyborn had bequeathed to Karnhide, and furthermore regarded their commander's handling of the problems as weak. However, we may see in hindsight that Karnhide was a skillful manipulator who concealed his guile well behind a veneer of gentle conviviality. A warrior of the old school, Karnhide had enough experience to know that the Guard and the Navy were august and rival schools of warfare, and that lack of cooperation between them was as traditional as it was endemic. He orchestrated the air war simply by showing both parties what they didn't want to do, and then standing back and allowing them to conjure their own solution. Now, the land war had to commence. Though the skies were clear enough for full-scale crop, the Guard were once
kinda. I don't know,
again
dude.
resistant. The air war had given the enemy plenty of time to make ready for an inevitable orbital invasion. Karnhide understood the reservations. A weaker, or perhaps less flexible commander might well have ordered the Guard in anyway, damning the consequences. But Karnhide believed that the answer lay with the Mechanicus. Another thorny web of negotiations faced him. If the Guard and the Navy could be famously uncooperative, the Mechanicus was another thing entirely. The Mechanicus priesthood had entered into the crusade through cooperative pacts carefully formed by Slado in the early years, and their war machines had proven invaluable, not to say decisive, in a great number of cases. But they were still an autonomous body, no more willingly subject to the command of a regular crusade general than the Adeptus Astartes, and it was widely understood that the priests of Mars were growing increasingly dissatisfied with the progress of the crusade. It had endured longer than they had been led to expect by Slado, and they were being required to provide ever greater quantities of battlefield vehicles. Makarov had done little to placate them, and those sections of the Mechanicus that had been assigned to the Second Front greatly resented not being used for the glory of the primary campaign. If they were to be used at all, they declared, then, in the Emperor's name, they would be used where the true glory lay. Karnhide had a reserve of over 130 Titans in his task force, the majority of them Warhound variants. He believed that the Titans had the power and fortitude to break open the ground defences and open a way for the Guard and its armour. Karnhide spent hours in patient, respectful talks with the priests of the Mechanicus. Eventually, he reduced his argument to a very simple piece of persuasive logic. He reasoned that War Master Makarov, boldly seeking triumph and
yeah,
glory,
dude, it probably
would most
is.
likely summon to the
There's probably
front line
something
those
else
units
going
that had
on
shown the
somewhere
greatest
else,
zeal
or
and
is
appetite
about
for
to.
war.
And
The
they're
very
like, oh
hunger
shit.
for victory
Just like
that he himself
Saddam in
exhibited,
fucking
and which he
South Park.
looked for
Hey,
in others.
relax,
If the Mechanicus
guy.
wished to quit
Look
the
over
Second
here.
Front and be
Bro.
realigned at the front, then an active display of military ambition would be needed. He promised that if the Mechanicus led the ground attack on Libov, he would personally see to it that the reports of that action were sent directly to the War Master's attention. It is important to note that Karnhide made no other promises, nor any claim that he could bring to bear influence that was not in his remit. He simply seeded the idea in the minds of the priests that they could get what they wanted by demonstrating their desire to meet the enemy. The Titans of the Mechanicus led the assault the next day. 3 key target zones were selected: Shredai Bay, Bulk Cliff Hive, and Zinc Hill. The Titan landings were achieved with the support of long-range orbital bombardment and carpet bombing. At each location, the Mechanicus tactic was to land and then radiate its forces out from the landing zone, rather than to drop and then advance on a target. Large areas of territory were cleared at Zinc Hill and Shredday Hive in this fashion. 23 hours after the Titan operational deployment, with all signs from the surface good.
Before Skyscanner, searching for cheap fried tomatoes. Cray.
Forgot to clear our...
And wrested control of the Hive's automatic defences from the archenemy. Though the second largest hive on the planet, Kazenberg fell by far the fastest and most easily, with the minimum of collateral damage. Later, during restoration work, the manufacturing and generating plants of the generally intact Kazenberg were swiftly brought back into use by the Imperial Occupation Force, which greatly aided early recovery. Zinc Hill, a tertiary-sized industrial hive in the heart of the Southern Nexus, proved the toughest of all the subsidiary hives to conquer.
Yeah, hell yeah,
It had
dude.
been the most resistant to the Mechanicus assault and still retained some air cover, which it used to devastating effect. Additionally,
Earthquakes,
second wave
documents.
Imperial Guard elements were dropped close to it and advanced under armor support. A vast battle then erupted along the western wall of the main hive structure as the Imperial forces attempted to storm the hive.
Cheers,
the
you
archenemy
guys.
deployed many bizarre engines of destruction, including mobile wall-top hardpoints and mechanized heavy mortars, which spat, by means unknown to the Imperial tech priests, geysers of high-velocity razor chaff.
How's your
These
week going,
latter
Francois?
weapons
Hope
were
you're
able to shred
chilling.
both men and body
Kick
armor,
those
even at comparatively
heretic asses
long
for me in
range.
Darktide.
However,
Show
their
'em who's
mechanisms
boss.
were delicate, and heavy bombardment from Imperial Guard field batteries eventually broke their line.
Maybe I'll
After
get a
3
couple
days
levels
of
in on
constant
Thursday.
warfare, the Western Wall was breached.
Not really feeling
the
it.
Imperial Guard elements successfully
It's been a
penetrated the outer
day.
ring
It's been one of
the
those
hive.
days.
In the broad agroponic zones inside the wall, the Imperial forces found themselves facing an enemy
But I'll get a
concealed
freshie,
in
though.
a ditchwork of trenches
Just to
and
get back to
foxholes.
normal.
Vicious trench warfare persisted for a further
We're getting
2
our paint
days
on, though.
until
We're
the
doing all
Titan
right. Look at this.
Vainglory
Look at this.
Tumultus was brought in to clear the way. Ground troop losses were high. Once the inner hive
Looks
had
like they
been
got
breached,
thrown
the
up on,
Imperial
but,
Guard
like,
was harried by a host of poorly
not
armed
bad for
cult
work,
zealots
right?
who attacked down the hive streets and stacks with suicidal disregard for their own safety. Karnhide rendered field command to the discretion
Nice,
of his
dude.
officers on the ground.
Hell
at Zinc
yeah.
Hill, allowing them to deal with the fluctuating and chaotic street fighting.
Are you still
on
streaming
a
your painting streams, dude?
minute-by-minute basis, rather than issue blanket commands from a distance.
It's like I don't get
Wisely, he
notifications
recognized
for
that by the time he had made any command decisions based on the data
for,
flow,
like,
the situation
vertical
would have
streams.
already changed. Later investigation revealed why Zinc Hill had been so hard a target. Arik Etigor had made his base at Zinc
No,
Hill
well,
rather than, as
the
many
undercoat,
would have presumed,
I used
the major hive.
bile
Zinc
green.
Hill had evidently become a site of keen
Come on.
ritual or sacred importance for
bi-
the Argentine
bile
forces,
green
and was
underneath.
therefore defended with special
And
vigor.
then I
It is also
dry
entirely
brushed
possible that Arik Etigor was in residence
goblin
at Zinc Hill at the time of the
green above it.
invasion. And the staunch defense was in part
And then
a
I'm
cover
gonna dry
to allow him to
brush-
escape and flee to Libov Hive.
No, not this one.
Observers and comrades described
And then I'm gonna
General
dry brush a
Karnhide's
dark
demeanor
green
during the
above it.
campaign as calm and affable, and
Or is
as
that too much, you
unflustered,
think?
almost relaxed. And this reputation.
I'm
did
thinking
him
right
no
now
favours
they're a
later.
little too dark
However,
now.
as is evidenced by his campaign journal, he was more
But,
than cognizant of
that
the
ear needs a little
demands
more
placed
work.
upon him
The
and
fingers
the
down
difficulties
here need
presented
more
by
work.
Libov
wait,
as a
yeah,
target.
fingers down here
He
need
wrote,
more work.
Grateful
His
as I
ear
am
needs
for the
work.
chance to take an active command, I could have
I mean,
wished
they
for
always
better
need
than
work,
this
but-
hive place. The land is tough and
I guess
uncompromising.
I could say they're
and the
tabletop
foe
ready,
bedded
right?
in. There is no time for thorough work to be done for intelligences. Such is the pressure set upon my shoulders by the Lord Militant,
Oh, okay.
and I am given an army to use
Most of the
that,
time,
while
yeah,
large,
dude.
is far from codified and honed. I have not had time to get
something about the
aware
vertical
of it,
streams. I
or
never
to
get-
understand its particular
I never get
traits.
no
Review,
notifications for
review,
vertical streams.
all day and all
Ever.
night, just to
I don't
scan
think
and
I've ever
learn the
gotten
merits of the
a
men I have
notification
at my
once
disposal.
for a vertical stream.
Once, the hour of attack was imminent. His tone became darker. I fret for this now.
You would have started
In
with the
Emperor's
darkest
name,
screen and then
may
gone
he
lighter?
protect us. The Navy
Alright,
and the
maybe I'll do that
Guard
with
are
one of the
bickering at
next
staff
guys.
level, and the fleet will not move as I dispose them. As for the hallowed priests of the Mechanicus,
That's still
I
got
have not
guys.
even contemplated their
Still got
sour
pieces.
visages yet. I am shown
Got
daily
those
scans of the
guys,
surface.
got the
Perhaps Thunderbolts will
guys.
open this for us.
Got these guys
I have
over
not seen such
here.
entrenched fortifications since Balhut. Men will burn and die, that I can see. Men will burn and die here, as much as on any field of war.
I got some more guys in here, but I have to
Following
primer
his
these.
success in convincing the Adeptus Mechanicus to deploy, Khan Hyde's tone was lifted, so contemporary accounts run. But again, his journals show the lie of it. The Titans are in this morning. Good
The
work,
arm
DC,
bases, look.
coming back by Overwatch. Picked after picked, clear transmission. I've seen walls fall and
See?
fortresses begin to burn. Such is the wrath of Mars. But I have stood in the cargo bays at the foot of a giant Titan and
There it
gazed up at
is.
it as if it
Tabletop
was a god.
ready.
Now they seem like specks on my magnifoscope. Just
And he
specks amidst
jumps
the
them like
blooms of
checkers.
fire.
Got him.
There are walls down there that nothing may shake apart.
Yeah, no, I don't play.
Not
I'm just here to
God.
paint.
Perhaps more tellingly, he wrote, I have been given an army of pieces and I'm
I mean, it
expected to
seems
make a whole
cool.
out of it. Better
It
pieces
seems
of work,
fun. I just,
rather
dude,
than
I
a
can't.
whole
I
that is
just,
not.
I don't have the. I don't
The
think I'll have the
southern
patience
fortresses
for
of the
like
transcontinental
learning all
nexus
the rules.
were cleared
and-
or in the process of
And I don't want to be
being
that
pacified.
noob that's like
Khan
sitting there
Hyde's
like, hey,
attention
hold on a
turned to
second,
the
let
main
me
hive.
let me
The
let me try to
gigantic
follow
sprawl
along
of
of what's
Libor
going on.
Hive, to which the
Hold on, hold
majority
on. What
of
did you do
all
now?
extant enemy
What happens
forces have
now?
retreated. As a
Yeah,
tactical
exactly.
objective, Libov represented four major discrete strategic problems. First and foremost was the main hive itself. As Carnide wrote, any force
Yeah.
commander, unless he is insane, takes a deep breath before commencing assault on a major hive. In many cases, even the insane ones do too. In their years of occupation, the enemy forces
Should
have
I?
turned
I'm
Libov
supposed to
into
do
a
the bases
veritable
first,
fortress,
right? Before I glue
armoring
the
hive's
actual
outer
character onto
structure
the
and
base.
festooning
Finish
it
the
with gun
base
emplacements
basing.
and malicious anti-personnel
Or should I put the
devices.
character, glue the
But
character
there were
on there, and
secondary
then
problems.
base,
To
and then
the
paint
west
around
of
the
Libov
feet,
Hive
and
lay the
add sand
ancillary
around the
hives
feet or whatever I'm
Zenik
doing,
and
dirt.
Zivan, both of which were still in enemy hands. Via these two hives, primary power reserves were fed into Libov from the power farms on the western seaboard. To the south and southwest of the main hive, an overlapping system of defensive trenches, dikes, and armor traps had been constructed. In a wide crescent, many hundreds of kilometers
Try darkest
long.
green.
Parts of this
black
area had also been
glaze,
mined.
Darkest green.
It would be a battle
dry
just getting
brush.
to the main hive.
Mid green
Khan Hyde's
highlight.
officers offered
then
many
highlights
conflicting
with
schemes
the
of how
lightest
best
green.
to take
Whoa.
Libov Hive. Some
All right,
recommended
let's
a
see.
frontal assault.
Darkest
Others
green.
an encircling movement to the east.
Black
Others
glaze.
still a cross-country drive to smash and cut off the ancillary hives.
What's the black
before turning
glaze
on the
for?
main hive itself. Khan Hyde, showing remarkable fluidity of
to
thinking.
make sound effects. Hell
Though
yeah,
it was
dude.
seen
Well, you're
as
getting in. You're
woolly
in
indecision by his
there,
peers,
you know.
elected to
You
try
should be
all of the
making
plans
sound effects.
simultaneously. In his journal, he reasoned, two
You're
concepts
not making the sound
strike
effects.
me with equal
I argue
merit.
you're not playing
One
it
is that no
right.
single ploy will bring Libov Hive to its knees. The other is that an officer usually strives the
Nah, dude,
hardest
as long as
to
you're having a good
accomplish
time,
plan,
hell yeah.
if it is his plan. He hates to be proved wrong. Khan Hyde divided his considerable forces into 6 armies. The first under Major General Arkol, who had recommended a slow siege to wait the enemy out, was to maintain the solid and firm occupation of the areas already taken, standing in reserve if necessary. The second, under
Really?
Colonel
Adding sand,
Hajak,
you should base
who
them
had
before
supported
primer.
Arkol's plans, was to be kept in reserve and support position outside Shredé Hive, ready for fast deployment.
Wait, I should base them
Hajak's
before
army
primer?
was mostly motorized
Why
light
did-
infantry.
I've seen so many
the
people,
third army,
like,
which
do
Khan
everything
Hyde
before
would
they put 'em on
command
the base.
himself, was the largest and would commence the frontal assault
But
on
prior-
Libov Hive, cutting the path through the defensive system. The fourth army under
glue
General
the guy
Dushin
to the base
was to
and
encircle
then primer
Libov
them
Hive
and
around the
then
east
do
fringe
everything
and
else?
attack from the northeast sector. Dushan had recommended such a plan. The 5th and 6th Armies, both smaller and motorized with extensive armor, would be commanded by Colonel Pequin and Colonel Vernsetter, respectively. They would drive at the ancillary hives with the 5th Army severing the communication links with Libov Hive.
I'm going to try that out. So
while the
darkest
6th
green,
struck
black
at Zivan and
glaze,
Zenik
and
themselves.
then darkest
As a final
green
touch,
again, dry
Karnheit
brush,
brought in the Navy and
mid-green
Mechanicus
highlight,
again.
then highlights
Privately
with the
praising
lightest
their actions thus far, he told them that the war was almost won, and that he would
Oh,
hate
and if
to
I'm
see
gonna be
either of
if I
them
use
robbed of
sand,
their share
then I
of
want
the
to type-
climactic
okay, I see.
glory by the Imperial Guard.
Database,
The Mechanicus immediately lent its war machines and Titans to the 3rd and 4th Army strengths, while the Navy agreed to conduct precision airstrikes on the coastal power farms, and then move in.
Well, I don't even know what
what
I'm gonna base what the terrain is gonna be like for my bases. I just
rearmament
just messing
and
around.
deployment. The main assault began. The fast mobile armies of Pequin and Vernsetter struck deep at the southern side of the ancillary hives. Pequin's forces succeeded in destroying all the mass transit and cable links with the main hive in the space of about a single day, and then turned west on the approaches of Zenik. By then, ferocious Navy airstrikes had reduced the power farms to a molten crater, lifting a 20-kilometre wide pall of black smoke into the atmosphere. Vernsetter's 6th Army broke into the southern side of Zevin, and then ground to a halt as it encountered formidable resistance. For the first time since the start of the invasion, the Imperial Guard was to come face to face with significant numbers of blood-packed. Doshan's large 4th Army had been on the move for the better part of 3 days, and swung around to assault the northeastern periphery of the main hive. Before they were within shelling range of the hive itself, they were met by enemy armor in huge numbers. Again, these forces were principally units of the notorious Blood Pact, armed with captured and customized Imperial battle tanks. An enormous armor battle began on the northeastern plains. Meanwhile, the 3rd Army, the largest force, was digging a path for itself up through the crude but lethal defensive system erected by the archenemy southwest of the hive. They had been under fire and shelling for the moment they began, but the strengths of the Mechanicus Titans served them well. The giant machines would destroy and clear the kind of defenses that would stop a tank or an armoured carrier. 2 Titans were lost in this phase during the huge set-piece onslaught, but by the end of the first day, Karnheit had the outer walls of the main hive in sight. Then he heard that, in Zevin, Vernsetter's men were being fought to a standstill by the merciless Blood Pact.
Oh
Worse
no,
was
I
to
don't
come.
have nothing.
Northeast
I
of the
just
main
I don't even
hive,
have an idea of
Doshan's 4th Army was being
what I want
pushed
to
back and
base my
slaughtered.
terrain to be.
Both
yet.
commanders
I don't know if it's
pleaded
going to be
with Karnheit
sand.
for
I don't know if
support
it's going to be
from
little
the
tiny
reserves.
pebbles.
He refused.
I'm not sure if it's going to be fucking
Much has been
cork.
made of Karnheit's
Cork.
cold and
Make
heartless
my own sheep.
refusal of aid, but the matter has been
Yeah,
overlaid.
I'm not too
He
sure
clearly
yet.
wanted to support the efforts of his beleaguered
I wanted my
officers,
guys to
but
like
it was
have a
matter of
story so I
commitment.
could put them
Karnheit knew well
the
that
way
the
I want
reserves
with
represented
terrain
by the
and whatever,
first
but
and
they don't.
more particularly
I don't
the
know. I
second
haven't gotten
army
that far.
groups would be vital to reinforce the main assault within a day or two. He could not spare them, or redirect them from this role, or risk losing the entire war. Karnheit also still had faith in the notion that an officer usually strives the hardest to accomplish a plan if it is his plan. He had confidence in both Doshan and Vernsetter. They had claimed to be capable of accomplishing their individual objectives. He had to trust them at their word. In less than 24 hours, his confidence was rewarded. Vernsetter managed to maneuver the large part of his 6th Army into an attacking lunge that drove the Blood Pact back about 3 kilometers into Zevin. Pequin, skimming the hive at Zevin, had moved with admirable speed to support the 6th in a counterstrike and brought the 5th Army in to close like a pincer on the Blood Pact's left flank. The 5th and 6th Armies were then heavily supported by the Navy Wings, which attacked both the Blood Pact in Zevin and strategic targets in Zemek Hive. It would be a further 9 days before the fierce warfare in the ancillary hives resulted in a conclusive Imperial victory, and losses were high, including Vernsetter himself, but the word was out. Fueled by the news that the Blood Pact was not as invincible as their reputation and demeanor suggested, Doshan redoubled his efforts on the northeast front and ran their heavy armor and Titans in his command in a long, tight angle of attack across the hydroelectric valleys of the East Lyob River. Simultaneously, he redirected battalions of light support and anti-tank units around the north in a circling maneuver. A second hellish tank battle developed, blotting out the sunlight with its smoke and dust. But Doshan's gambit was successful. Battered by the advancing barrage of the Armor and Mechanicus machines, the formidable host of blood-packed war machines recoiled north of the hydroelectric valleys and attempted to reform in squadron strength. Many became easy targets for the advancing anti-tank units and were destroyed before they could reassemble. The blood-packed armor broke into two distinct elements, both forced to retreat towards the flanks of the main hive. Outside the main east gate, one element was overtaken by a rapidly advancing force of warhounds and tank destroyers and systematically annihilated. The other element attempted to push out against the encircling light support battalions, which punished it severely and broke its cohesion. As Doshan's main force advanced to assault the outer defences of Libov Hive proper, this light support and tank destroyer force prowled the charred hinterland, picking off the last of the Bloodpack's struggling machines, cut off and rogue like wild animals. By that time, as word that Doshan's first proper assault on the main hive had begun in earnest reached him, Karnhide had broken the Third Army past the defence systems and crossed the outer road networks into the shadow of the hive itself. The trooper Emmerich Garsch, a Kolstek infantryman with the Third Army, recorded this chilling and articulate account of what confronted them there. The hive itself, Libov Hive as it is named, appeared to us like a black cliff rising from the cracked grey ground. It was plated in giant sections like a beetle, like the lustrous wing cases of a great beetle, and stacks and spires rose like spines above that towering plating high into the sky, where the smoke and cloud fogged them. The wind was cold and sharp, and there were all sorts of scents on that wind, blood and dirt and oil and ash. We were ascending along the road network that once had led into the base of the vast hive. Many of these were great rock creep bridges and spans supported on stilts and pylons of stone. All the while we were under fire from the emplacements and hard points, studying the hive's black plating. Cannon fire batteries, las, flamers. They used the flamers closest to, with a range of fire burned men off the roadways and blistered the surface of the bridges until they bubbled and blistered.
Stuff from
the barrage filled the air with sparks and darts of fire,
I'm
dense
down.
as sleet.
Yeah,
We
I've seen
were
some of
told to
that mixed
advance, but
stuff.
we
I'm
dared
not
As to advance
probably
was to
not going to get
advance
any of
into
that
death, and
stuff.
even our
I was just going to do
commissars
like
balked at the option.
what people
But to
usually
stay
do,
put was death
hobbyists
also,
and stuff.
as the
Just
myriad shots
with
of shells dropped
build
in
with
amongst
what
us
you
and
have
blew us bone
around the
from bone.
house.
So we charged the hive, and it was
I'll probably
not death.
probably do that and then
It
paint
was very like it, and it was death for many, but it was not death for me, for I am here writing of it. It was just like death, very like it. General Karnhide's Third Army penetrated the southwestern perimeter of Libov Hive in the early hours of the campaign's 17th day. Intense block warfare began as the Imperial invaders poured in and up through the hive's shelved stacks. Well-orchestrated resistance met them every step of the way, and Karnhide was quickly forced to call in the secondary army to support him, as he had anticipated. The fighting continued unabated for 80 hours. 46 hours into that period, news came that Doshan's force had also breached the main hive perimeter in the northeast, and was also driving in towards the hive's core. Karnhide's spirits lifted, but were quickly dashed again, as other force commanders had discovered before him, and as many again afterwards. Karnhide found in the Bloodpact a serious and respectable foe that understands with curiously human insight the scalding game that is. After 80 hours, Karnhide called a halt and allowed the front line to retire and be replaced. Fighting dulled for a while, though all at the main assault line could hear the distant thump of Doshan's northeastern attack. At hour 85, Karnhide pressed on again, with a sudden
Blood
furious
colors,
lunge
alright.
through the multiple levels of the wounded hive.
I don't think I'll
causing a
need 'em,
sudden
but, I'll
stunned
check 'em out.
withdrawal on the part of the enemy.
Yeah, 'cause I could,
They were
all of the ones that I have right here are
encountering fewer
Vallejo.
blood pact at this stage, and more levies and cultists. A great fire.
Got the
Possibly the result
Vallejo
of stray
model
munitions, but
colors.
most probably due to
Oh,
enemy sabotage.
I got the
broke
Vallejo
out in the main hive's northern
game
sectors
colors.
and burned unchecked.
One.
It would later claim and destroy approximately 1/5 of the hive.
And
Karnhide's mind was now focused on one goal.
I got the Vallejo,
to
like,
locate and
face
destroy
model
Arak
color
Etager,
set.
the charismatic focus of Libov's resistance.
Yeah, dude.
On several occasions,
Vallejo's
rumors
cool.
had circulated that
They're
Etager
all
had
right.
been found and slain, but each one was false. Karnhide drove his forces into the heart of the hive, relentlessly, realizing that victory, however painful, was now in his grasp. Late on the 73rd day of the Libov campaign, 3 fire teams of specialists from the 82nd Carnelian Light Foot, commanded by Lieutenant Victor Gonfell, finally ran the Etigor to the ground. The fire teams comprised 18 infantrymen with 2 crews of light support.
Oh, and I don't know if you saw
and
51's message
specialised
or
in
not
city
earlier,
block
but he was
clearance.
going
Gonfell was
to
a
be
veteran
rain
officer,
checking Dark
driving
Tide
ahead of the
also.
main advance.
Just a
through
heads
the
up,
now
just in case if you're
burning
waiting.
dams of Northern Libov. Gonfell's men encountered unexpected resistance from a squad of blood-packed warriors. The firefight was inconclusive, though it drove the enemy back down a stackway into a vandalized sensorium, and left 3 of the foe dead on the causeway outside. Checking the bodies for life signs, Karnhide's men had learned, to their cost, that wounded blood-packed often played dead whilst palming grenades. Gonfell's medic noticed that the corpses wore black garlands and had gold leaf rubbed upon their masks. Gonfell was at once alert to the notion that these troopers were somehow special or raised up.
In
He
your
sent
opinion,
signals
do you
to
think it
General
would be
Command for
better
support.
to
Before any support could
paint
arrive,
the
Gonfell's squads
stuff
found themselves under renewed fire
outside
from the precincts of
first,
the old
and
Sensorium.
then the
Gonfell elected
crevices
to move
later
and ordered
on?
his mortar teams to
Because
shell
I'm going to have
the
to do the
facade
outside
and
a
the inner
second
yards.
coat anyways?
After 20 minutes of
Or should I
sustained
start off
bombing,
with the
which
inside
expended most
crevices
of the
first
troops'
and work
shell
my way
munitions?
outwards?
Gonfell
That way I
ran
don't,
his troops forward through
you
the
know,
shelled-out
mess up when I'm
ruins of
trying
the
to reach in
Sensorium
there to
front.
try to
They met fierce resistance.
paint something on the inside and
Blood-packed
end up
troopers
hitting,
came
you know,
out of
operation,
cover.
hitting the sides
Ammo
of the
spent
thing.
using their bayonets, trench axes, and hands to repel
I would
the
think
attackers.
from the inside out,
Gonfell killed
but
6 of them personally, and
since I'm going to give it
in his
another coat
memoirs,
anyways,
suggests
should I
that
do the
many of his
outside
men accomplished
first
a
and then
similar feat.
inside?
The
and then
Imperials
back
had
to
charged
outside?
the las
Or
rifles
we're
at their disposal
inside,
and made
outside, then do the
slaughter
inside
of
again,
the
and then
federal
back to
bravery
outside.
of the pact. Fighting continued deep into the Sensorium Quad and beyond into the Holy Sepulchre, which Gonfell relates as being heinously spoiled and smeared about in all treason. By this time, a squad of Kazakin specialists had closed on the area to support Gonfell. However, Gonfell himself had sighted an enemy he believed to be the rogue Etigor. With 2 of his men, he pursued him through the lower quad and out towards the west door of the Sensorium. Turning, as if cornered, the enemy drew a barbed chainsword and snarled into the attack. Both of Gonfell's men died in terrible ways. Gonfell himself fired twice and missed. He had one last charge left in his power pack, and he expended it into the enemy's snarling face. Akea Etigor was dead. It later transpired that Gonfell had missed, and the headshot was claimed by one of the Kazakin marksmen in an adjacent building. But in spirit, the work was done. Though sporadic fighting continued for weeks afterwards, Libov was taken and Karnhide was victorious. Karnhide expected glory for his achievement. He did not get it. Doubts were cast on his strength of character and even his ability to command. Deeply wounded by criticism, he published his account of the action at Libov and retired from the crusade. 18 months later, he was dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Karnhide's actions on Libov and the nature of his disgrace and death is an object lesson to all scholars of imperial tactics. Though he achieved his goals, Karnhide was accused of wavering and indecision, and of muddling his focus. Qyburn himself berated Karnhide for allowing the parts of your command to do as they will. Only history and the persuasive voice of the Tactica Imperialis can amend that slight. Andreas Karnhide understood his duty and his function. Poorly supplied and equipped, he accomplished what his seniors did not believe to be feasible. They accused him of ill focus against focused foe, but he understood the true nature of the crusade animal and all its various parts, and allowed them to function at their best in concert rather than cohesion. Ironic, then, that against mankind's newest and most united foe, Karnheit chose to play to the strengths of the Imperial Guard, Navy, and Mechanicus at its most divided, and make that an asset. Even with his officers, with their disparate plans and schemes, he sought triumph, allowing each one his head. Though driven to suicide and disgrace by his contemporaries, Karnheit remains an example to all commanders who find the divided wings of the Aquila at his or her disposal. Karnheit saw strength and success in disunity, just as the archenemy realized the opposite. His example should be followed wisely. Geryon. In 774, Colonel Commissar Gaunt led a small infiltration unit of 12 to the occupied world of Geryon to find and eliminate the traitor Lord General Notchus Sturm before he could reveal classified Astra Militarum secrets to the Arcanite handlers. In the course of this hazardous mission, which was ultimately successful, Gaunt's team uncovered the first solid proof of the Anarch's lingering disaffection with the Gauls' rule. Information that would form the germ of the policy, formally initiated in 781, to incubate dissent between the two enemy leaders. Though Gaunt had been unable to ease the general suffering of Geryon during his target-specific infiltration mission, the Tanith First was among the large crusade force that returned to finally liberate Geryon from the archenemy control in 777. In order to undertake the covert Geryon mission, Gaunt had himself removed from command of the Tanith First. During his absence, the regiment, lacking an officer dedicated to its interests, found itself amalgamated with a distinguished Belladon regiment, the Belladon 81st. This kind of amalgamation, referred to by Blackwood as make do and mend, was extremely common during the desperate early years of the Corwood assault, as units scattered or depleted by loss were forced into new makeshift command groups to make the best use of manpower. The fit was not, at first, easy, and for a while it seemed the Tanith Regiment would vanish from the Imperial records as a regiment with its own identity. However, Gaunt returned from the Geryon mission in time to rejoin his regiment at Ancron Sextus in 776, following the death in action of Colonel Wilder, nominally the commander of the amalgamated unit. During the prosecution of the steppe cities of Ancron Sextus, Gaunt resumed command and restored the original regimental title, Tanith First. However, many of Wilder's Belladon troops, excellent line troopers in their own right, though more used to conventional battlefield war than scout operations, remained within the Tanith ranks. For the second time, the dwindling Tanith force was replenished with new intake. The first had been Vergestite troops following the siege of Verbenhive. The Ancron Sextus campaign, focusing on the monolithic steppe cities, was particularly punishing. The steppe cities, the largest of which was Spa-Shed Mons, were ancient and semi-ruined edifices, believed to have dated from M30 or even earlier. Certain construction details were similar to elements found in the antique, perhaps pre-human fabrications of the so-called fortress worlds of the Cabal systems, and though Ancron Sextus was an outlier to that group, it is classified as part of the fortress world zone. After the initial phase of the liberation effort, the cult armies of the Arcanite, driven out of the imperial settlements and townships, took refuge in the steppe cities. Compartmentalized and multi-cursal in design, they were hard to penetrate, and scouring the archenemy components out of them was costly. Some theories had suggested the ancient steppe monuments had been raised in veneration of the God Emperor, but during the campaign, the notion they were holy sites was rejected. Evidence emerged that the structures, especially Spa-Shed Mons, were ether-adjacent, acting as gateways to the warp. If worship of the God Emperor had been their original purpose, they had been polluted long since by the ruinous powers. On discovery of the blasphemous nature of the site, orbital bombardment was employed. Weakened by problems of morale and logistics, and the fact that the bulk of its manpower came from new and recently founded regiments, the majority of experienced veteran guard units had been routed to the main front line. The second front had begun to stagnate by the start of 777. To compound the problem, armies of the Corwood assault often found themselves outclassed by the highly proficient ground forces fielded by Sek. It is likely many of the Second Front commanders would have incurred Makarov's severe displeasure had the War Master not been so singularly occupied with his own objectives. However, Lord General von Voits of the 5th made particular strenuous efforts to rally the Second Front, in particular by promoting a series of uncompromising actions to liberate certain worlds previously regarded as lost causes. Von Voits dubbed his strategy Crush and Burn, and its purpose was to restore pride to the Second Front through the final domination of contested fortress worlds in the Cabal systems, and the systematic purging of worlds that had, until then, seemed incontrovertibly the possession of the archenemy, such as Geryon. Crush and Burn had the desired effect, though the vast expenditure of resources necessitated by the policy was later questioned by the Munitorum. Von Voits persisted, reclaiming or purging several of the fortress worlds in rapid succession. In 778, an especially bloody banishment campaign took place on the ruinous world of Jago. Among the Imperial units sent to hold and relieve Jago was the Tanith First. Jago was eventually secured after a series of significant battles, but the Tenith Regiment, ordered to hold an isolated and outlying position, took serious losses. Gaunt himself, severely injured in the action, had considered Von Voits something of a sponsor and mentor during earlier phases of the Crusade, and took issue with Von Voits over the relentless and costly nature of this crush and burn policy, specifically objecting to the Lord General's use of the Tanith Regiment, which Von Voits wastefully utilised as standard field infantry, a role for which they were undersupported and not suited, rather than exploiting their specialism as scout and infiltrator units, which Gaunt felt could have been employed with greater effect elsewhere in the theatre. Relations between Gaunt and Von Voits soured, and a resentment persisted despite later efforts by Von Voits to mollify and favour his former protégé. Gaunt's feelings towards the Lord General's callous misuse of militarum specialists endured until Von Voits' death in action on Urdesh in 792. Fringe actions, 774 to 780. Though the most intense areas of the war in this period were at the primary front and the secondary Corwood assault line, other operations were triggered across the whole region by the Crusade effort. The Lord Governor of the neighbouring Kulan sector was obliged to deploy armies to suppress uprisings on Kulan, San Greal and Antrosa, when local populations rose up in protest against deprivation and austerity caused by the tithes levied to maintain supply of the Crusade effort. The Kulan Wars had only ended 20 years previously, Slado's last military undertaking before the Sabbath Crusade, and unrest had continued to simmer in many quarters. All of these rebellions were suspected to be the work of Arcanite insurgents, fomenting unrest to weaken the Crusade process, but only at Antrosa was any evidence found of archenemy involvement. The San Grail revolt was the most severe, with the ruling nobility issuing a writ of defamation against the Lord Sector Governor and refusing to recognise his authority. Seneschal Grian Galat of the powerful House Galat was named acting Sector Governor, and San Grail declared itself the true Sector capital world. The Lord Governor Kulan was quick to quash this affront to his authority, which had no backing from the High Lords or any imperial process of law, and brutal war was waged to put down the rebellion. In the aftermath, it was clear that the revolt had been driven by genuine public discontent at the enforced privation and draining of material supplies, coupled with the opportunistic ambition of House Galet. Prince Obermid. The far-trailing Corwood province world, Prince Obermid, liberated during Newfound in 756, also rose up in spontaneous revolt in 778, and the unrest spread to 4 other worlds in the immediate zone. Pacification efforts under General Rand Hubert were directed from Balhut, pulling several preparing regiments earmarked for frontline advance. It took only a show of force and some minor skirmishes to draw the worlds back into line, but on Prince Obermid itself, a 3-year covert operation by agents of military intelligence was able to uncover and eradicate a conspiracy of Umbra Baal faction, 5th columnists, who had infiltrated the government and Munitorum at high levels and generated the unrest. Similar, though less serious, conspiracies were identified on Albrecht, Difnea and Withold, and eradicated before they could cause serious harm. But it was clear that the Arcanate forces, probably at the instigation of the malevolently cunning Anarch, were actively resorting to non-military means to destabilise backline worlds and weaken the Crusade fronts by strangling or breaking their lines of supply. Orestes. Open military action was also tried in this regard, with arch-enemy Vahaduk Reavers harassing shipping in the Antioch and Orestes zones. Most notably, the Arcanite tried to cut Crusade supplies by military effort at Orestes. Another vital Forge World asset, Orestes was spared by chance in 780 in an action that became the only significant engine war of the Corwood Assault period to rival Libov. Orestes' Forge World lay on the trailward hem of the Sabbat region, technically outside the territory itself, but was a vital source of munitions for the Crusade effort and, like Prince Obermid, a key link in the victory veins. Famously, the sibling world of Orestes' Nightworld in the Ultima Segmentum, the venerable Legio Tempestus uses both as base outposts. It was targeted by Arcanite forces to cut off crucial supply lines to the Crusade. By chance, the Legio Invicta, en route from the Beltran cluster to join the primary Crusade line at the request of War Master Makarov, had put into Orestes for restock and was persuaded to walk in defence of the world. In doing so, they effectively broke Makarov's injunction to join him without delay. The Princeps Maximus of the Legio Invicta believed that the protection of the supply lines and the defence of a Mechanicus world took priority. The resulting engine war was significant, coming close to the scale of Karnhide's Libov assault, and Legio Invicta was triumphant. Legio Invicta then moved spinwards to join the Crusade host, and participated in several key actions along the primary front, including the liberation of Urdesh. The primary front, 775 to 785. As war continued to rage along the Corwood Assault, the primary Crusade advanced spinward. Said Makarov, is the true measure of it, the true test, the true battle. He dubbed his frontal assault operation Araxen, perhaps suggesting he knew he was charging like a bull. Makarov had almost 2/3 of the total Crusade host with him, and advanced with typical speed, apparently heedless of the necessity to stabilise his route, a tactic privately questioned by many primary front commanders. The War Master evidently expected the Lords Militant of the Corwood Assault to maintain his rearguard and reinforce the world secured in his wake. This aggressive and uncompromising and confrontational approach, which even the likes of Cyborn and Blackwood seemed reluctant even to undertake, is perhaps the defining quality of Makarov's leadership. He had applied the same approach upon assuming the mantle of War Master, with the initial few years of outthrust from Balhut. Matched with his infinite cunning and deep long-term planning and anticipation, belligerent speed of advance seemed his default. Makarov seldom loitered or bided his time in securement. The Carcharodon assaults typify his eagerness to contend with the foe. The Gore had struck back hard, and surprisingly rapidly after Balhut, so Makarov hit back in turn and kept hitting, his intention to keep driving the Archon back in recoil, without time to dig in or recover, even if it meant risking overstretch of his own forces. Urians famously compared this to the slugging, swarming, pressuring style of an infighting boxer. Holton remarks the War Master did not want to give the archenemy any sense that it was winning or gaining ground, and then give it no opportunity for measured retreat or reorder. Makarov's attack style is relentless, forcing the enemy to keep moving and keep responding, while constantly stinging from strikes, never leaving him time to draw breath. Makarov would not let the Gore out of the fight, not for a second. This rapid pursuit assault tactic proved immensely successful until the early 780s, with significant victories against Gorite forces at Zadok, Hydema, Perseville, and Pais, along with successful battle fleet operations along the cluster's edge between 776 and 780. Makarov's intention was to hammer the Gore's forces back into the Irenes group, severing all coordinated connection between the Archon and his Magisters on the second front. In the Irenes group itself, he intended to splinter the Gor's forces and either annihilate them outright or drive them out of the Sabbat region and back into the sanguinary worlds from which they had sprung. To Makarov's mounting frustration, the pace of the operation began to flag, as the battle fleet and auxiliary elements struggled to keep up with his demands for swift mobility and resupply. In 779, warp storms in the Agadius region forced the bulk of his forces into safe refuge for 6 months, leaving only Marshal Aldo's battle group operating to rimward, capable of fluid movement. Aldo's group, attempting to maintain the pressure tactics of Operation Oroxen to the letter, approached Anxisus Bone in late 780 and met a superior Arcanite force led by Helvik Etegor. After an initial clash, Aldo wisely saw he would do nothing except get overwhelmed and slaughtered if he maintained his position, though he attempted to hold his line for 6 weeks in the hope that primary front elements would arrive to reinforce him. He was eventually obliged to withdraw to Pice. No longer grounded by storms, the primary main armies finally joined him there in 781, with Makarov eager to renew his rapid advance and make back squandered time. Anxisus Bone, 781 to 783. Anxisus Bone, denied to Aldo in 780, became the natural first objective of the waylaid operation. Makarov sent Urians and Lord General Elric in as principals, dispatching Lugo to guard the advance's flank at Tigris, and directed Aldo to trailing to investigate reports of mass cult army musters on Lugo and Aurelius, and take action as necessary. Anxisus Bone proved to be a nightmarish and long-winded enterprise. Helvik Etegor's forces, which included brigades of the Urmat Brutate, made great use of the vast sub-hive levels, resistant to orbital attack, and frustrated Imperial attempts to flush them out. Long before the world was won in 783, General Lugo, by then supported by militant Marshal Tazara's Kaison host, was facing a new wave of Gorite assault at Tigris and Gilberatus. True to his scheme, Makarov had driven through the Carcharodon cluster, but at the fringe of the Irenes group, his advance had genuinely stalled. Irenes group assaults, 781 to 785. Orlok Gore and his host Magistars had capitalized on the warp storms of 779 to refocus their lines and prepare themselves to meet Makarov's headlong attack. The storm activity had gifted them several months of respite from the unstinting Imperial pursuit, and some commentators suggest the storm had been, by some arcane means, summoned by the Gore to hold back the War Master's relentless drive. Whether it was by design or ill fortune, the consequences were inevitable. By 781, after such a promising period of advance, War Master Makarov's main battle groups had been brought to an unexpected and complete standstill at the frontiers of the Irenes group, and the Archon was no longer forced into a reactive stance. The archenemy Overlord had managed to withdraw the bulk of his forces from the Carcharodon cluster with sufficient alacrity, ahead of the Imperial push, to construct a robust position of resistance along the Irenes border. Makarov's forces were deadlocked at Tigris, Gilbertus, Visor and Sangre. Abondio and the Anxisus Bone War was still raging. In his heart, Makarov must have known that he needed significant reinforcement, but he knew no help was to be had from the Crusade's secondary front. Comprising as it did now the 5th, 7th, 9th and 12th armies, the Corward assault was operating far trailwards of Makarov's principal strengths, and seemed to remain unable to dislodge the legions of Anarch Sek. Between them, the Archon and his vile Magister had created a situation of defiance that was entirely frustrating both prongs of Makarov's crusade. An attempt to break the deadlock through the establishment of a third front ended in miserable disaster, with the loss of the Second Army, under Marshal Aldo, to Sekite forces at Hellas in 782. Senior advisors urged Makarov to break off from this bull-headed prosecution of the Irenes line and concentrate on squashing Sek in the Cabal systems. With the threat of Sek removed, they counselled, the Crusade could safely resume its assault of the Archon's position. But Makarov rejected the notion, claiming it would give the Archon enough time, perhaps 2 or 3 years, to rebuild and retrench to such an extent that the Irenes line would become unassailable. He also knew that the fierce planet wars raging simultaneously on those worlds could not simply be broken free of without suffering vast losses. Split between these two concentrations of resistance, Makarov's crusade was hemorrhaging momentum and material. The crusade had become two crusades, and even Makarov's vast war tithes and massive support from adjacent sector lords could not sustain his ambitions. Furthermore, there was a general and growing fear that if properly coordinated, the forces of Sek and Gore might combine with such effect, the Sabbat World's crusade force would actually be annihilated. Tigris finally fell to Urians in early 784, and he immediately pressed on to assault Kilgrave. His spirits somewhat lifted by this sense of a breakthrough coming, Makarov doubled down on his determination not to break off the primary assault. He insisted that his original plan was delivering results, and that his critics had merely needed to exhibit some patience. However, there is no disguising the immense toll taken on the Astra Militarum along the Irenes line before this period. Perhaps the most concentrated, grueling, costly and unrelenting assault phase of the Crusade to date. Makarov's stubborn position that his grand scheme was achieving its intended goals may simply have been vanity, and a desire not to lose face or seem weak in the eyes of High Command. Confidential reports now make it clear that Makarov's determination was secretly fueled by the hope of another line of attack that very few in High Command had knowledge of. This program, an audacious and covert gambit designed to destabilize and sunder the Arcanite hosts, was a massive gamble even by Makarov standards, and offered absolutely no guarantee of success. The germ of the idea originated far from the front lines at the Irenes frontier, and even the embattled holdings of the Corwood assault. The strategy that might yet win the crusade was first formed on Balhut in 780. A plan of salvation. After the beating they had taken on the fortress world of Jago in 778, the Tanith First under Gaunt had finally been retired from the line after 12 years of unrelieved active combat service. The retirement was long overdue and was expected to last for at least a year. Gaunt hoped for resupply and reinforcement, and perhaps posting to the primary front, having served for most of the previous years in the thankless turmoil of the second front zones. It was during this period of retirement that he was brought into contact with an Arcanite prisoner, a captured Etigor, who had been sent to Balhut for interrogation. The Etigor, named Mabon, was a Sekite deserter, and some sources say he had previously served with the Blood Pact, and before that had been an Astra Militarum officer. There was clearly little reason to trust the word of a creature who could change sides with such frequency. But the Etika refused to talk to anyone except Gaunt, whom he had encountered on Garyon during the classified mission of 774. Details of the proceedings on Balhut are scant, but it is clear that during the interviews, Gaunt first hit upon the notion of dividing the enemy through a sustained campaign of sabotage and misdirection, in an attempt to provoke Sek and the Gore into an internecine war that would weaken them both. This essential idea was not original to Gaunt. Variations on just such a program had been discussed, formulated and even brought to blue paper level in the years immediately after Balhut. But, at that time, a violent division between the Arcanite leaders had been expected as a consequence of the power vacuum after Nadzibar's death. That had, to all intents and purposes, never come. The Anarch and the Archon had formed a collaborative bond that had lasted for over a decade, and whatever grievances they held against each other had been sublimited in favour of the general war effort. Gaunt's proposal, which he took first to the Officio Prefectus, was simple: to artificially aggravate the natural enmity between the two through a systematic campaign of raids against Sekite and Gorite forces that would appear to credit each faction with the assault upon the other. This could only hope to be successful in any way if the Imperials were privy to specialist data concerning arch-enemy targets, habits and dispositions, data that the captive Etigor promised to deliver for reasons that are not entirely understood. After careful study, the plan was ratified and supported by Cyborn and then rapidly by the War Master himself. Ironically, attempts by Arcanite insurgents to eliminate the captive Etigor on Balhut only added weight to the idea that the data he carried was of substantive value. Lord Militant Qyburn was later to downplay the War Master's involvement and even awareness of the project. Writing in 789, he recalled feeling that, if the mission went well, it would be of significance. For the cause, of course, but also for everyone who supported the effort. In that regard, success would lend some gloss to the War Master. But I believe he had precious little familiarity with the scheme. He was a great distance to Spinward at the primary front, hammering at the doors of the Irenes group. And it doesn't take a TAC officer to appreciate how many missions, submissions, requisitions and blue papers he was required to scrutinise and approve every day. The Salvation's Reach expedition was one raid, part of a sequence of minor operations, in a corner of the Sabbat worlds, not seen as directly strategic. If it failed, it would be forgotten, dismissed as irrelevant. But if it succeeded, this sequence of minor operations comprised 28 raids, which in no way represented any significant commitment of men and material. They were nothing so grand the War Master had to approve resourcing. Makarov's own commentary at the time shows a much keener interest in the project than Qyburn suggests, and a more direct oversight. But Qyburn was an old hand, and evidently eager to play a political game in an effort to magnify his role in the endeavour. He still seethed with resentment of the way he and others had been disfavoured by appointment to the Corwood assault. Qyburn wanted to prove his worth and secure, in the eyes of history, great personal credit for the project, as if he and he alone championed it. To this end, he even played down Gaunt's involvement, seeming to suggest the entire thing had been his brainchild, rather than Gaunt's or Makarov's. However, Qyburn had always been one of the most politically astute Lord Militants. Edreco suggests that while acknowledging Qyburn's clear desire to take the Carnadon's share of the credit, if the venture prospered, credit that would reignite his reputation and career and make him a more credible alternative to Makarov, Qyburn was quietly but staunchly protecting both Gaunt and the War Master. He underplayed it as a munitorum commitment, evading any potential charges that vital resources had been wasted on a doomed and unjustifiable program, and took responsibility for shepherding the plan so that, should it have failed, both Gaunt, if he survived, and the War Master would be absolved of any charges of recklessness in the affair. As proof of Qyburn's nuanced selflessness, Edreco cites that, during negotiations with Adeptus Astartes, whose participation in the mission was essential, the Lord Militant allowed himself to be personally humiliated in favour of Gaunt over matters of protocol. Qyburn understood the game, Edreco writes, citing Gaunt's personal record of the encounter. He was playing a part. He knew the Adeptus Astartes would want to make the bond personally with Gaunt. But the chapter master wouldn't have looked at a petition if it hadn't come with the explicit backing of Crusade High Echelon and a Lord Militant or two. Qyburn was an enabler. He had to be present, for form's sake, even if it was just so they could belittle him. Under Qyburn's stewardship, the operation was authorised for action in 781. The Rimwood Marginals. The programme began under utmost secrecy. Though Gaunt's Salvation's Reach mission was the most famous, it was not the first action to take place. The first attack was made 4 weeks before Gaunt embarked, and 7 more were executed before Gaunt reached the Marginals' target zone. In the space of these 6 months, sidereal, 28 raids took place at selected and classified locations across the trailing portion of Newfound and Cabal regions. All of them worked according to the philosophy devised by Gaunt, Qyburn and their ally at the Officio Prefectus, Commissariat Intelligence Director Isaiah Mercure. Gaunt and Mercure had specified the tactics and the manner of the clues and evidence to be left behind, including Arcanite-coded information to be broadcast on arch-enemy Vox substrates. These transmissions were, as Mercure recollected, as authentic as we could make them. The most critical mission, and the one upon which all the others depended, was, of course, Gaunt's undertaking at Salvation's Reach in the remote Rimwood Marginals. The Marginal Zone lies on the rim of the Sabbat territories and extends beyond the formal Imperial boundary into the Dead Gulf territories and Feral World expanse. The currents of real space and the vagaries of the warp have condensed a vast cloud of material in the gravity pit of this region, a monumental agglomeration of debris, almost 200,000 kilometers deep at its thickest.
I built a Wix website overnight, and it helped launch.
Some of it, however, is artificial in origin. Many theories circulate as to the origin of this material, most of them unreliable. During the Beatis' original crusade of liberation across the Sabbat worlds, the Marginals were alleged to have been the site of a significant fleet action, a turning point in the fortunes of the Imperium that had put the interests of the Sanguinary worlds and their Archon into retreat. Legend said that Salvation's Reach had been the name of the Imperial flagship, a flagship that had stood its ground under astonishing enemy fire and had died with all hands, holding the line long enough for the Saints' victory to be achieved. It is reported in many old chronicles that the debris accumulated in the junk belt as the wreckage of that titanic fleet action, the battlefield litter of one of the Rim's greatest real space engagements. Other stories insist that Salvation's Reach was the name of a planet destroyed during that void fight, or the name of the arch-enemy supermassive that had finally been scuppered just minutes before it target-locked the Saints' cruiser. Imperial survey missions suggest these legends are no better than half-truths. The debris field includes a great deal of military junk, but it is the accumulated residue of thousands of fights accidentally clustered there, not the devastation left by one fight at this location. Besides, there are too many tech types and too many species variants. Cogitation analysis reveals vast differences in the ages and decay of debris samples. Some pieces of scrap were just a few hundred years old. Some were a few 100,000. Current thinking is that this graveyard of wrecks has been formed by the natural gravitational perturbations of real space. Craft lost and foundered down through the ages, washed up at Salvation's Reach, and there they had gathered, collected, mangled each other, and, through the actions of decay and gravitic pressure, fused into a great knot of material, accumulating like a metal reef. Not all of the material is Imperial in origin. Some ancient scraps, the carcasses of lost Imperial vessels, are relics of Terran tech that had not been seen for so long they were no longer recognizable to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Old template patterns, unrecoverably deformed, lurked in the silent residue. Some of it is so old, so worn,
Hell yeah,
so
yeah, I'll do
alien,
that for sure.
it is impossible to discern the source or original function. Mechanicus expeditions have been mounted down the years, along with inquisitorial probe missions and countless endeavours of salvage and scavenging, but the Marginals are unstable, inhospitable and remote, and the secrets cast away there were too demanding to recover. The core target sought by Gaunt's mission was a hulk habitat of considerable size, converted for use as a weapons development facility and manufactory. This facility had originally been set up by the Magister Heritor Asphodel under the instruction of the then Archon Nadzibar. It was extremely remote, inconspicuous, and allowed for the enhancement and testing of weapon systems, be they systems developed by the mad genius Asphodel, recovered Xenos artifacts, or gifts from the demented Chaos Gods. Nadzibar had fallen on Balhut, and Asphodel had perished by Gaunt's hand on Vergast, but the facility remained, falling into the control of the Anarch Sec. He was using it to strengthen his hand and develop weapon support for his sons. It was an arsenal, a stockpile, and a laboratory. According to the asset, the Sekite prisoner Mabon, Sek still felt strongly he should have taken on the mantle of Archon after Nadzibar. The Anarch resented Gor's rise to eminence and, though obliged by martial politics of the Sanguinary worlds to pact with him, had little respect for Gor's command of the campaign since Balhut. Sek envied Gor's authority, and he envied Gor's revolutionarily disciplined personal army, the Blood Pact. He press-ganged blood-packed warriors like Mabon to help him create his own force, the Sons of Sek, and set out to prove that he deserved the mantle of Archon. It was a compelling claim. The previous decade had shown Erloc Gore to be a savage chieftain, capable of extreme brutality, even by the standards of the Ruinous Powers. His blood pact was certainly supremely effective, but he was also sloppy and lacked strategic insight. His blunt and ferocious style of war making him lose as much as he gained. In contrast, the Anarch Sek, a far more ingenious and mercurial tactician, had performed superbly along the Crusade's second front in the face of the Imperium's most determined efforts. It was entirely reasonable to expect that if, by means of facilities such as Salvation's Reach, Sek could show he was a better leader than Gore, more able, better served and better equipped, the tribes of the sanguinary worlds might oust Gore and look to Sek to take the crown of the Arcanate and begin a new period of effective aggression. What better results could the Imperium hope for than to have the fragile partnership of Archon and Anarch fracture, and for Gore and Sek to turn upon each other? The asset, Mabon, had told Gorn that the Weapon Rights were a fraternity of technical adepts who operated the Reach manufactories and had served the malign Heritor Asphodel, but would now be serving a new Heritor, enabling him to function as Sek's principal arms provider. Their prowess was likened to the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, though they relied far less on augmetic body modifications and far more on esoteric and forbidden lore. He called the institution a College of Heritance. Gorn's mission, at the head of the Tanith First, and with the cooperative action of the Adeptus Astartes, was to infiltrate the college facility, remove vital and valuable materials, and then destroy it, thus depriving Sek of precious technologies and stealing them for the Imperial cause. Moreover, he was to make this raid appear to be the work of Gorite Blood Pact. The Highness, Sir Armaduke. The ship selected for the Rimwood Marginals mission was the Highness Sir Armaduke, an Imperial Tempest-class frigate. The Highness Sir Armaduke was an old ship that had seen centuries of service in previous campaigns and had been withdrawn from primary battle fleet operations and reserved for auxiliary and support roles. It is alleged the ship was deemed by many to be reaching the end of its viable service life and was scheduled for decommission, and though this is denied by fleet sources, given the highly hazardous nature of the expedition, it seems likely that Qyburn secured a disposable asset in case of loss. Certainly, he would have found it much more difficult to procure an active line ship. The Armaduke measured 1.5 kilometers from prow to stern, and a third of that dimension abeam across the fins. Its real space displacement was 6.2 megatons, commanded by Shipmaster Spiker. The vessel carried for the purpose of the mission 32,407 lives, including the entire Tanith First and its regimental retinue. The Armaduke was built for close war. Its hull armour was pitted and scorched, and triple thickness along the flanks and the prow. The prow cone was rutted with deep scars and healed damage. The Armaduke was of a dogged breed of ancient Imperial ships that liked to get in tight with its foe, and was prepared to get hurt in order to kill an enemy. The Reach objective. Though sorely tested and suffering considerable losses, the Tanith First eventually achieved their mission, though the true nature of that success was not fully understood until 791. Gorn's force had destroyed the archenemy weapons manufactory, crippling several critical programs that would have brought great harm to the Imperial cause, and had secretly recovered items and artifacts of great significance to the war effort. Furthermore, and most particularly, the mission, in conjunction with the other raids executed during that time period, had created a rift between the archenemy forces, leading both the Anarch and the Archon to believe, eventually, that their forces were turning on each other. This hostility was slow to brew at first, but gradually increased in intensity. From 785 until the liberation of Urdesh in 792, multiplying states of brutal fighting erupted along Gorite and Shedemekan clan lines, effectively hobbling the efforts of the Archon in the Irene zone, and the operations of the Anarch along the Khan front. The true extent of this Arcanite civil war is not fully understood, for very little of it was witnessed by Imperial observers. Some outlying worlds were found scarred or dead, and several Imperial holdings liberated by Makarov's primary front revealed evidence of fierce infighting between Sekite and Pacted forces and their allies. Most notably, a ferocious 2-year conflict took place around 787 in the Vanda Pi systems. Both Astra Militarum intelligence and astropathic reports also suggest several conflicts taking place outside Imperial territory, to the outward world regions of the sanguinary tribes. This was a pivotal period for Crusade fortunes, with the enemy divided and great gains to be made. But Gaunt knew none of this, although, as it later emerged, his force had successfully extricated from the Rimworld's target site. The Highness Sir Armaduke suffered a drive failure during its return journey and was lost in the Immaterium. All souls aboard were presumed dead. By 784, the success of the Salvation's Reach mission was properly recognised, and it was formally entered on the honour roll of Crusade actions. Citations and decorations were awarded in honour of the lives lost, and Ibram Gaunt was posthumously promoted to the rank of Lord Militant Commander in respect of his deeds and selfless contribution. The primary front, 786 to 791. The artificially provoked conflict between the Arcanite host became increasingly apparent from 783 onwards. As Sekite's actions along the Corwood assault slackened, so too did the Archon's formidable resistance along the Irenes line. Imperial efforts were redoubled. Orians led a punishing assault on Kilgrave, while Eric and Rand Hupert campaigned on Nibble and Doseed, stemming archenemy efforts to flank the Crusade line to Rimwood. Visor continued to resist Makarov's attacks, and several fleet actions denied him the opportunity to race on to Harkonnen. Emboldened by the sense that a tide was turning, and that his foe was divided, Makarov was hungry to capitalise, and extended the bulk of his huge Imperial Guard force across a midline front to prosecute both the Irenes group and the last elements of resistance in the Carcharodon cluster, while maintaining the Corwood assault. Once again, and despite the gains, he faced increasing dissent from his own generals and Lords Militant. For over a decade they had been urging that lasting success in the Crusade could only be achieved through decisive focus on the warlord Archon, and that simultaneously campaigning against Sek spread the Imperial battle groups too thinly. Many, including Cyborn, Van Voights and Blackwood, believed that enemy metal had been shattered by infighting, and that Sek's threat was waning rapidly. Kyborn urged the War Master to collapse the Corwood assault forces into a holding formation and advance bulk elements to the front line. Presumably, he fervently wished to lead those elements to the front in person, desiring at last to see action at the leading edge of the Crusade. Makarov rejected this approach again and again, insisting that focusing on Gore would allow Sek time to rebuild his strength, and that this would ultimately lead to an Imperial rout. Once again, he was stubbornly steadfast in his policy. He would not allow the enemy to make gains or consolidate anywhere. His strategy was wise, in that the Archon and the Anarch were far from defeated, despite the wounds they had inflicted upon each other. This became quickly apparent at Noctis Primaris and Irenes Secundus. Noctis Primaris. The Gore surprised Imperial planners with a full-throated attack on Noctis Primaris in 788, during a phase when his host was expected to do little more than resist in established positions or fall back, due to overstretch and weakness. Adraco suggests that Gore's forces had been supplemented by new strengths raised in the sanguinary worlds, a theory supported by Emony and Hermes. Both Noctis Primaris and Fika were swept up in this counterpunch, though the worst of the fighting took place on Noctis. A combination of both surface assault and fleet Vahaduk actions took place in the middle months of the year, clearly intended to both break and then circle behind the Crusade's primary front, possibly with the intention of retaking Sangre Adondio and smashing the deadlock at Visor. The Archon was unquestionably determined to relieve the relentless pressure on his own front line at Irenes by executing a pincer to assault and break Makarov's wide but vulnerable midline front. The archenemy had moved from several years of defensive fallback to renewed open offensive. The attack shocked High Command, but Makarov seemed sanguine. He had made great gains, but he, and perhaps he alone, had not been so foolish as to presume the enemy cause lost. His placement in 785 of the so-called Kulan fleet at Pice suggested he was braced for such a counterpunch, anticipating that the Gaur, violent and aggressive in his tactics, would not endure being on the back foot for long, even if it meant a wildly reckless assault. Certainly, without the Kulan fleet able to meet the assault, Noctis Primaris and Faker would have been lost in a matter of weeks. As an aside, it is interesting to consider the archenemy's strategy here. Though the Noctis assault, as it became known, bore the trademarks of Urlok Gaur's typical ferocity and aggression, and some might say Makarov's own approach, it was not without nuance. The daring plan swept in trailwards, along a core parallel route that seemed unsupported and lacking in obvious backlines. Those lines of supply and munition support clearly existed, however, or the assault would have swiftly foundered, which suggests careful work had been made both preparing and disguising the progress of advance. Many see this handiwork as far more characteristic of the Anarch, well established as a far more subtle and coordinated commander than the Archon. Strong cases have been made that the Noctis assault, while carried out by Gaur's blood-packed host, was devised and orchestrated by Sek. Perhaps this evidence reveals that the rift between the two enemy leaders was nothing like as fundamental as originally believed, but it is more likely, as argued by Teleshar, Ekros and others, that by 788, terms had been reached between the two archenemy warlords in a desperate effort to reunify and avoid annihilation, an idea strongly supported by Eric and Urians. Certainly, circa 786 and 787, the archenemy military was close to collapse on both fronts, and efforts had to be made to maintain their integrity. It is also possible that by that stage, the Arcanite leaders had discovered how fully and completely they had been tricked into fighting each other. The Noctis assault plan may have been devised by Sek for the Gaur's use by way of a peace offering, though Sek himself would of course benefit from its success. Undoubtedly, as actions along the Corwood assault soon revealed, Sek was redoubling his efforts, almost to the point of recklessness, as if in an effort to prove his loyalty to the Gaur, even at the risk of his own life. Makarov countered the Noctis assault with the swift deployment of the Kulan fleet, and dispatched Eric at the head of the 14th Army from Nibal. The Kulan fleet, under Grand Admiral Sorovan, numbering some 190 ships, was not technically part of the Crusade's fighting lists, but was the backbone of the Kulan sector battle fleet. These resources had been loaned to Makarov by the Kulan sector Lord Governor after the Corwood front had opened up in 773. Though the Kulan sector had many interests of its own to protect, the Lord Governor, whose worlds were being tithed heavily to support Makarov's crusade, recognized the imperative of reinforcing the War Master, for the loss of the Sabbath World's territory would put his own sector.
Before we found Skyscanner,
Oh yeah, I'm rain checking on Darktide tonight. Just a heads up.
Which the Arcanite forces were
I'm
broken.
just gonna paint a little
This
bit.
fierce system campaign added several great and illustrious feats to the Crusade honor lists. Most spectacularly, the defeat by the Kuglan battleship Niard Antita of 6 archenemy capital ships. By Engier, Eric's Astra Militarum forces had arrived in system, and they began the ground war that would see Noctis Primaris liberated by 789 and Fika relieved in 790. A command that established Eric's ability beyond doubt. Irenes Secundus. Also in 788, a major Arcanite force under Gorgona Etagur struck at Dosiad, raiding heavily before concentrating its fury at Irenes Secundus. This assault had been seen as a second pincer designed to mirror the Noctis assault to Rimwood and close the circle on the midline front. However, though brutal, it lacked the finesse of the Noctis assault, and is presumed neither to be the handiwork of Sek, nor part of his gift to the Gore of a countermeasure plan. Indeed, its sheer savagery displayed the touch of the Gore's hand, and it seems it may have been the Archon's own attempt to supplement and mimic Sek's battle plan. Gorgona's host was vast, and Irene's Secondus was essentially razed before Imperial relief could arrive. But the archenemy group was not well supplied, and its advance had been impromptu and overhasty, further evidence of the Gore's ill-considered aggression. Indeed, it is possible that the Gore reserved for Gorgana large army strengths that Sek had earmarked for the Noctis assault. If that is true, and the Anarch's plan had been implemented fully, Eric's efforts would probably have been overwhelmed. Lord Militant Call led the assault to Irene's Secondus, later supported by army groups commanded by Rand Hupert and General Casimir. Gorgana was killed, though quickly replaced by Mater Hagaral, a Washist cult leader, and the arch-enemy forces driven back to Septa Beta in 790, where the war to eradicate them still rages at the time of writing. The Corwood Assault, 786 to 791. His operation significantly restricted by Imperial effort and the lingering conflict with the Archon's forces, Sek's dominance of the Second Front decayed rapidly. He was able to maintain only harrying raids and attacks on shipping, and withdrew considerable Sekite reserves from the Cabal systems. Qyburn and his fellow commanders on the Second Front began to trust that enemy operations in their zone had been broken, and that the Corwood Assault would soon be wound up so that the Crusade could reunite and press against the primary targets together. But Makarov refused to fold Corwood Line, a decision vindicated first by the surprise attacks at Noctis Primaris and Irene's Secondus, and then by a savage return to form by the Anarch in 789. Perhaps coordinating with the Gore's efforts, the Anarch returned to the field and struck at Habutus, Ursa Lycon, and Bashun, inflicting broad and wounding effects on the Imperial positions. In his journals, Qyburn later reflected on this period. We used Sek's ambition and power against him. After the Salvation's Reach mission, there were others, all framed with the same intent, to ignite the rivalry between Sek and Gore so they could no longer move in unity. There was conflict and considerable fighting between the sanguinary tribes. Sek, damn his name, was finally broken down, pushed out of the Khan and Cabal systems just as Archon Gore was hounded back to the stalwart line of the Irene's group. We thought victory was close then. We could smell it. But Makarov kept us where we were. He suspected it was not done. I admire his instincts for that, though I still argue that his schemes of prosecution, as I have done since the second damn front was ever a thing. Sek came back at us in 89, after 3 or maybe 4 years of hit and run. He struck at Habutus, then Ursa, then Bashun. It was bloody, cost us a lot. Either the Anarch had been brought into line again by Gore and was making a conspicuous effort to display his renewed loyalty, or he was beginning a last-ditch effort to consolidate his own power and resources. What is definitely clear is that the Anarch of this phase was very different from the one encountered before. Indeed, many claimed he had been wounded or had in some other way lost his wits. In his appraisal notes, tactician Anthony de Beota wrote, "At the best of times, the ruinous powers are unpredictable and their tactics impenetrable, but now they seem outright incomprehensible. They seem to have come to take back the Cabal systems, and yet even by their inhuman standards, they are behaving like maniacs. There is a theory that Anarch Sek has gone insane. It has become impossible to discern any tactical logic to his campaign, not in comparison to some of his actions, which have often displayed extraordinary cunning. Many in Tactica and intelligence have concluded that he has suffered a psychic break. Perhaps he has been psychologically damaged by the need to show obeisance to the Archon. Gore has humbled him and brought him into line, and that may have been too much for an ego like Sek's. Or perhaps he is ill, or damaged, or corrupted beyond any measure we can understand." In practical terms, The Anarch launched a counter-strike against a clutch of systems equal to the Gore's Noctis assault, and by late 789 it became obvious that its particular focus was Urdesh Forge World, because of its productive assets. I doubt any other world in the Sabbath Zone has changed hands so often in the last 100 years. The Anarch's assault on Urdesh began in full in 790. No one could doubt the strategic importance of Urdesh. Its weapons and munition output were vital to the Crusade and the archenemy alike. Blackwood wrote, "Urdesh was the keystone. All stood or fell without it for both sides. Tithed to the very hilt, the Kulan worlds could no longer support the Crusade alone, and it was imperative that we had a functioning, mass-productive forge world in our local chain. Without it, the primary front would disintegrate, but the foe needed it too. With Urdesh in his pocket again, the Gore could fortify sufficiently to stimulate a renewed offensive across the Carcharodon cluster, and years again would be gone up in smoke. Without Urdesh, he would be obliged to sliver back into the feral worlds from whence he came and lick his wounds for a few decades. For that bastard, the Anarch, Urdesh was the ultimate prize. Lacking its reserves, his forces were facing obliteration within months. I'd say by 792, if he could take it, and he so wanted to, his hosts would be reborn, and we'd be broken all the way back to the newfound trailing. It would be done for us, and Sek would have proved his worth to the Gore, or perhaps empowered himself to such an extent a new Archon would arise in rapid fashion. Warmaster Makarov suddenly saw this extreme jeopardy, a possibility he had feared for many years. To maintain both fronts, he was obliged to act. Some thought he would at last change his strategy and unify the Crusade forces, as so many of his commanders had been arguing for years. But Makarov, stubborn as ever, would not be seen to change his mind or admit weakness in his overall scheme. He decided to simply change focus. By 773, his primary attention had been Irenes and Gore, with Sek as a profound but secondary threat, to be countered by his Corwood generals. Now, he declared the Anarch had become the primary and immediate threat. Overruling objections, he tasked Lord Militant Eric with the continued prosecution of Archon Gore and the Irenes group, and removed himself and almost all of his principal commanders to the Corwood front to drive the attack on Sek himself. There was an implied, though unstated, feeling that Makarov believed his Corwood commanders had underperformed and thoroughly failed in their efforts to keep the Anarch suppressed. Makarov, underplaying how vital Urdesh was to his own operations, intended to use the Forge World as bait. He would lure the Anarch into open confrontation and destroy him there, in one blow, securing the lifelines of the Crusade and effectively reducing the enemy threat by 50%. But the Anarch, cunning to the very end, had a scheme of his own in mind, and his objectives, though as brutally direct as Makarov's, were far more mysterious, and would turn the war for Urdesh into the most crucial theatre of the Crusade since Balhut. Makarov had reckoned without two things: the manner of the archenemy's defence of Urdesh, and the magnitude of a new threat revealed by the very operations designed to effect the schism between Gore and Sek. Urdesh, 789 to 792. The resilience of Urdesh Forge World during the long and contested years of struggle against the sanguinary tribes is remarkable, and a testament to the courage of that world's peoples, and to the true spirit of mankind. It has been compared oft times to the fortitude of Cadia, and I believe that is not an overestimation. Lord Militant General Lugo, Urdesh, 794. The Savage Campaign, to achieve control of Urdesh Forge World, lasted 4 long years. Initial raids had begun prior to 789, and continued throughout the turn of the decade, as harassing attacks turned into cover for infiltration and insurgent operations. Sad to relate, many of the august institutions and dynastic claves fell prey to archenemy infiltration very swiftly. One may wonder how that happened, but it is important to remember Urdesh's long and complex history. Urdesh has stood between the Imperial and Arcanate territories since its foundation, and its identity, intrinsically connected to the priesthood of Mars, has always placed it outside of typical Imperial holdings. Down the troubled centuries since its founding, the world has been occupied at different times and for long periods by both the Imperium and the Arcanate culture. Further, Urdesh is home to many dynastic claves, lay tech orders that exist alongside the control of the Adeptus Mechanicus. These have regularly prospered and grown in power during periods when they were free from Imperial or Mechanicus supervision, often, as now seems clear, promoted and supported by the Arcanate Heritors or Tech Magi. Under Arcanate occupation, these dynastic claves were allowed the freedom to develop ingenious technologies, but the Adeptus Mechanicus controlled their activities far more strictly and relied less and less on the output of their machine shops. Many were reduced to very basic levels of industry, manufacturing such items as bayonets, buckles, and weapon focus rings. And resentment was high, as Clave seniors felt their ingenuity and brilliance was clipped and constrained. Claves were always loyal to themselves before all other considerations. Since the earliest days of the dynasts, Clave wars had been fought in all manner of ways, but open violence was the rarest form. Trade wars, espionage, assassination, these were the arsenals of the Urdeshi Claves. Clave loyalty, survival, wealth, and knowledge were the touchstones. It is shameful to relate that secretly many felt their fortunes would be more prosperous under Arcanite rule. During interview, one Clave Ordinate, suspected of collaboration with the archenemy, declared, "Our house has stood like many of the dynastic Claves since the earliest times of settlement. We consider ourselves independent and ally with those who will benefit us most. You know well that the mastery of Urdeshi lands has changed many times over the centuries. The throne, the Rimwood tribes, and back and forth. We have worked with and for the sanguinary brood as often as we have distant terror. Indeed, in some golden eras, past Gors have favoured us more than the throne of the Forge Priests of Mars has ever done." By 790, the Anarch's pernicious hold on Urdeshi and its geothermically powered forge sites was considerable, and fierce wars had broken out between Imperial forces and Sekite invaders, who were bolstered by pro-Arcanite local strengths. As Makarov brought his main crusade strength to bear, leading the liberation in person and commanding an operation on the Corwood line for the first time since the start of his war mastery, his hands were tied. Battlefleet action could easily unseat the Anarch's host and eliminate him to boot, but that course would also result in the loss of principal forge assets that would render Urdesh worthless for Imperial purposes. Makarov could not sacrifice Urdesh simply to annihilate Sek. He was obliged to opt for surface war. Furthermore, and through until 791, Sek's tactics were impenetrable. There seemed to be little or no cohesion, with Sekite forces attacking at random, often ignoring viable or significant strategic targets in favour of random assaults. This pattern, or rather lack of logical pattern, gave rise to the theory that he had become deranged. Warfare was widespread in several major and simultaneous theatres across the planet, including a struggle to secure the Garapan heartlands, an imperial initiative led by the Beati in person. Serious land war in the southern regions and an increasing focus on the great city of Eltath, where Makarov and High Command had made their station. In 791, at the very height of the fighting, insight came from an unexpected source. High Command was still dealing with the obvious challenge of overcoming the Anarch's military threat and struggling with its lack of understanding of his tactics. Makarov's focus was to draw Sek out. Urdesh was already strong bait for the Anarch, and it is not unreasonable to suggest that the War Master had brought the Beati to Urdesh to present an even more inviting target for the archenemy warlord. However, experienced insight was able to show that the Anarch was following a very deliberate scheme of his own, and one which virtually matched Makarov's. Sek knew his own value as a target, and he knew how badly Makarov wished to see him destroyed. He had presented himself as bait, and disguised this bare and bold step with an apparently random and nonsensical scheme of attack, designed to confound and confuse his enemy. The Anarch's strategy on Urdesh was a mirror of our own, to wit, the enticement containment, and elimination of the opposing leaders, the obliteration of the War Master and his high command. As remarked, this revelation came from an entirely unexpected source, from Ibram Gaunt. The return of the dead. Gaunt's mission force had survived the warp translation and arrived at Urdesh at the height of the fighting. Such are the vagaries of the Immaterium. Gaunt and his regiment had experienced the passage of just a few months, but in adjusted time, they had been missing and listed as dead for the better part of a decade. Gaunt's return was celebrated, and his posthumous election to the rank of Lord Militant honoured, allowing him to participate at high command level. This elevation afforded him access to restricted tactical data that allowed him the opportunity for insight, revealing the nature of the Anarch's intentions. Sek intended to draw in Makarov, the Beatty, and the majority of the Crusade's command staff, and decapitate the Crusade by eliminating its high command. Already, with the enemy assault on Altaf increasing in severity, the Lords of Crusade High Command were pressing for a shift in approach, and a significant body of them, including many of the most senior, had come to believe that the Crusade might now only continue under fresh blood. Formal proceedings began to have Makarov removed from office, according to protocol, and a replacement War Master found. Gaunt, against his will, was drawn into this process, and his name was proposed as an ideal replacement, a suggestion backed by Kyber. The Arcanite host. Further, because he had been absent for nearly 10 years, he was untainted by the unworthy intrigue and factional squabbles that had riddled High Command since the inception of the Corwood assault. He was a man that almost all the Lords Militant, no matter where their loyalties lay, could back. Gaunt's response to this was typically idiosyncratic and resolute. Along with Urian's, he could see that the removal of their War Master, no matter how unpopular he might be, would cause chaos and upheaval, a crisis that the enemy would capitalise on. At the heart of an active war, it was vital to maintain stability. It is also clear that Gaunt respected and appreciated Makarov's long-proven tactical ability, no matter how difficult and unpredictable Makarov might be to deal with in person. Acknowledging the strenuous objections made by the Lords Militant, eager to have Makarov removed from office, most particularly their complaint that Makarov was withdrawn and reclusive and was no longer taking the counsel of his war chiefs, Gaunt decided to side with neither. He refused to co-sign the formal document of removal, a declaration of confidence, supported by the beleaguered Sector Lord Governor of Kulan, the Masters of the Fleet, and the High Lords of Terror. Nor did he align with those Lords Militant who opposed such a move. He went directly to the sequestered War Master and presented the facts to him, suggesting the War Master address the nature of his relationship with High Command. Makarov, impressed with the simple and bold nature of Gaunt's actions, took heed. Though reluctant, he resumed a more visible role in the operation of command. This much-needed resumption of authority coincided with the Beatty's triumphant victory at Garapan, which was believed for a while to have resulted in the death of the Anarch. But the Anarch had gone to ground. Open military contests were not his aim. His operations on proud Urdesh had reached their clandestine culmination. Under cover of open war, he had placed insurgent cells and covert weapons, some of them woe machines, designed long before by the now dead Herator Asphodel, within imperial positions including Elteth. The Anarch moved to finish his work and eliminate Makarov, the Saint, and the High Command staff. But the timing of these measures was infinitely delicate, for he had a second objective, beyond the destruction of the Crusade's command structure. This timing also hinged on Gaunt's unexpected return from the dead. Gaunt had brought with him valuable artifacts recovered from the Salvation's Reach facility 10 years before. Artifacts whose purpose was not yet identified by Imperial investigators, but which were evidently of great cultural or military significance. Gaunt had, inadvertently, delivered them directly to the target world, bringing them from the Archon's possession and into Sek's eager grasp. The Anarch Sek wished to eradicate his eternal enemies, but he also wished to recover those priceless relics intact. The Eagle Stones. Mystery still surrounds the artifacts known as the Eagle Stones, also referred to by various sources as the Glyptothek. The objects were recovered from a College of Heritance at the Arcanite or Sekite Weapons Research Facility, Salvation's Reach, by Gaunt's raid mission in 781, where they were being held for study by the Magia Heptica, or weapon rites, serving the Anarch's host. Roughly translated as a library in stone, the name Glyptothek refers to 8 damaged stone tablets of ancient design, constructed from a type of heavy, gleaming red rock that metallurgical assays cannot identify. All of the tablets were chipped, and one had a significant piece missing. They were covered with inscribed markings that defied translation. According to Gaunt's Sekite asset, Mabon, they were said to be Xenos items of significance, recovered from one of the Khan worlds some years earlier, and considered very important. The asset reportedly believed that the Anarch considered them a discovery of singular value. Undoubtedly Xenos, the Glyptothek objects have been studied by Imperial scientists and Mechanicus Versan engineers, who have suggested that they match artifacts and cultural relics of the Kinibrak, a species known to have existed in the Khan group until about 10,000 years ago, roughly the era of the Great Crusade. Xenoarchaeologists believe the Kinibrak persisted for a short while beyond that, into the Age of Heresy, but they no longer exist. Evidence indicates they became extinct during that period, possibly as a result of the Great Heresy. The Kinibrak species has been proposed as the original architects of the Fortress worlds found in the Cabal Zone and the Khan worlds. Current thinking is they were not the original builders of those sites, though they may have occupied and used them. The purpose of the Eagle Stones has not been discovered. They may be of ritual or sacred significance, or a record of some data or chronicle, or may even be xenotech devices, whose function, use and operation has yet to be established. It is also not understood why the archenemy considered them to be so valuable, but it is quite apparent they were held in high esteem by the Arcanate, or at least Sekite parties. The Lord Executor. In the opening months of 792 M41, the 37th year of the Sabbath World's crusade, Warmaster Makarov's prosecution of the Anarch Sek, focused on the contested Forge world of Urdesh, reached a critical pass. The Imperial victory of Garapan, led by Saint Sabbat, had broken the archenemy's main strength and also exposed the callow ruthlessness of his intended strategy to behead the Imperial High Command, even if it meant sacrificing the precious Forge world. Sek's decapitation strike at Altath had been repulsed, and many tacticians believed that a tide had turned. The Anarch was spent, and the Crusade force would deliver the Urdeshi theatre in a matter of months, if not weeks. After that, the archenemy Archon Gur would be alone. At last, a credible endpoint to the Crusade seemed within reach. Made aware of his own shortcomings, or perhaps, as it is better phrased, his lack of sympathetic coordination with High Command, Warmaster Makarov had assumed a more high-profile role in the leadership of the Crusade effort. It is clear from many sources that while some question Makarov's intractable command style and his unwavering pursuit of some strategic decisions, a dogmatic quality that had come to be seen as bloody-minded, very few in the upper echelon faulted Makarov's overall tactical ability. His grasp of the whole Sabbath theatre was second to none, and he had often initiated long-term strategic ploys that bemused his officers, only to be vindicated when they bore fruit. The High Lords of Terror may consider themselves blessed to have their Sabbath Worlds campaign squarely in the hands of one of the most naturally gifted commanders in Imperial history. As noted by Adraco, Salian, Vorseed, and numerous others, Makarov was a tactician of genius, possessing greater strategic skills, if significantly less popularity, than his predecessor, the mighty and venerated Slado. Makarov's flaw had always been his dealings with personnel, most specifically the officers who depended upon him and upon whom his control relied. Makarov made a singular effort to be less withdrawn, to consult and to discuss, and to be more accessible. Further to this end, he restored an old office, that of Lord Executor, which had not been in common use for some time. The role of the Lord Executor was to be the War Master's right hand, his spokesman, his second, his interface. The Lord Executor was expected to triage the concerns of High Command, to communicate the wishes of the War Master to command level, and to enact or execute the War Master's will. The Lord Executor was also considered the War Master elect. For this role, Makarov chose Gaunt. It is reported that Gaunt was surprised by this promotion. It can be seen that the title was a reward for Gaunt's service and for his loyalty in the face of the effort to unseat the War Master. But it was also an astute and cunning move on Makarov's part, for Gaunt came without the baggage of years of high command rivalry and intrigue. He was both a strong and safe choice, acceptable to all. In his new role, Gaunt began working feverishly to consolidate the apparent victory on Urdesh and organise the pursuit and capture of the wounded Anarch, while also initiating the tactical and logistical efforts that would be required to support the Lord Militant Eric at the Irenes front and bring the whole force of the Crusade to bear against the Gore. But the war on Urdesh was not done, nor was the Anarch as disarmed as many supposed. There then began the bloodiest and most astonishing period of the campaign thus far, a sequence of events that many history texts have reported with the utmost credulity. Whatever the truth of it, it is no exaggeration to say that the fate of the entire sector hung in the balance, to be determined by just a handful of the Imperial Guard. The Anarch's cunning feint became apparent. Deploying infiltration units, he took advantage of what many saw as the Imperials' hour of victory on Urdesh, and launched a two-pronged assault on Alteth, under cover and confusion of widespread insurgency raids. His secondary target was the Adeptus Mechanicus facility, where the Glyptothek were being housed. He struck at that to recover the so-called Eagle Stones from Imperial hands. His primary and simultaneous target was the elimination of the Urdeshic Palace at Alteth, which served as headquarters for Crusade High Command. His intention was to eliminate Makarov, the Beatty, and the entire command cadre in one fell swoop. To this end, he activated woe machines gifted to him years before by the Arcanate Heritors. The woe machines. The destructive capabilities of the so-called woe machines, especially those constructed by the Heritor called Asphodel, were well known, and well documented by such military scholars as Tengwell and Gwelt. They had been a blight since the very earliest months of the Crusade, nearly 4 decades before. Most had taken the form of gross-scale war engines, and the range and idiosyncrasies of these lethal devices had been a constant horror. However, Imperial tech adepts had seriously underestimated the full variety and degree of sophistication. The war machines that struck at Alteth were unlike any witnessed or recorded before. Though ultimately mechanical, they were hideously ingenious amalgams of machine and human organics, whereby the human components were used to mask or cloak the killing devices within. This degree of technical sophistication and applied scientific methods has required a fundamental reappraisal of the Arcanate technologies by Imperial science. It is estimated by many that, in this regard, the technological abilities of the Heritors exceed by some measure the upper limits of Imperial capacity. Some argue that these devices were rare aberrations, costly to manufacture, and held back for very specific use. Others insist they were the rogue and demented works of Asphodel, now long dead, who was clearly an exceptional talent, and thus cannot ever be replicated or repeated. What is clear is that the woe machines unleashed at the Urdeshic Palace employed, more than any other of their kind, the transmutational powers of the war, which was harnessed both as a weapon and a means of disguise, veiling the alloy of machines and human organic parts from detection. Battle reports suggest that at least one, if not both, of the 2 woe machines deployed was capable of rearranging reality around itself, altering the physical nature of its immediate locality by allowing the transformative energies of the Empyrean to bleed into our domain. The devices were almost unstoppable, and the death toll extensive. Lord Militant General Barthel von Voits heroically laid down his life in an attack on one of the constructs. Perhaps inspired by the significance of his new role as Lord Executor, Gaunt played a key role in the elimination of both machines. He stood in support of the Beatty when she, at great personal cost, slew the first of them, and assisted a senior agent of the Holy Ordos in the ultimate elimination of the second. During the hours of this atrocity, with High Command on the verge of destruction, Gaunt's regiment, the Tanith First, was able to resist the infiltration efforts to recover the Glyptothek and deny the enemy troops sent to obtain them. We may see, once again, how Makarov's decisions are vindicated. He chose Gaunt to be his Lord Executor, and, in the most dire hour of need, Gaunt did not fail him. We may also see how Ibram Gaunt and his Tanith ghosts achieved the feats that have them now regarded, without question, as the true heroes and champions of the Sabbath Crusade. Their names and deeds will live forever in the honour citations of Urdesh Forgeworld. The victory. In order to best oversee his villainous acts at Elteth, the Anarch Sek had secluded himself at an offshore location within range of the main city. Makarov was, by diverse means, able to pinpoint this location, despite the fact that the Anarch's position had eluded all sensor and detection systems until that point. The site was annihilated from orbit. The official, or at least popular record, is that Sek perished there. Indeed, many commemorative paintings show this taking place, and it is repeated in many primers and public accounts published at the time. However, while a great and popular legend, it is inaccurate, as is the claim that Gaunt was present, a twisting of facts that was said to outrage him. The Anarch managed one last effort to evade his doom, escaping his bolt hole by means of some teleportational mechanism. The Anarch was, however, tracked. An official statement issued by the Munitorum in the days after the fight for Elteth reads, "Just before noon today, the Astra Militarum Intelligence Service confirmed a report received yesterday from an Aeronautica Imperialis patrol in the Southern Oceanic Zone. The report, which has been verified, declared that 7 days ago, on an island called Orkadel in the Farapan Archipelago, the archenemy Anarch, known as Sek, was apprehended and terminated by Imperial Guard troops. The destruction of Sek and his efforts on the field of Urdesh marked a turning point in the crusade. The elimination of the Anarch and the relentless threat he posed was a triumph as significant as Balhut. The way now lay open for the War Master to recompose his crusading forces and unify them in the prosecution of the singular foe, Urlach Gur. The next objectives. A dream long cherished, a recurring dream, one that has sat upon me within my mind since my earliest days, and one which I intend to give my life in fulfillment. It pains my heart to know that others must give their lives too, for this is a dream that cannot easily be made corporeal. But terror is with us, and duty informs our every human soul, and the God Emperor fortifies us with his light. It is a dream that will be born real unto the stars. War Master Slado, on the proposed liberation of the Sabbath Worlds, Kulan 764. Under the coordination of his Lord Executor, Makarov has made ready to move the main Crusade battle groups from the Urdesh zone to relieve Lord Militant Eric and begin mass assault of the Irenes line. The hated Gur has been driven to the brink, cornered at the barbarian Spinward frontier. Makarov will hound him out and leave him for the carrion birds. This final phase must not be underestimated. Twice before, the Crusade has been repelled at the Irenes line, and though he now stands alone, the Gur is amply supplied with military forces. News comes to us of significant
Spring
These worlds, most agree, will be the significant theatres of Makarov's endgame. We may only wonder what great feats and acts of courage may be witnessed on those far-off fields, and what inspired histories are yet to be set down, recording the final battles of our age. Trailward of that fierce front line, many other matters remain that must be dealt with all urgency. Many worlds across the inner systems are racked and reeling from the campaigns thus far, and require vital support to rebuild infrastructures and to combat wretched famine and miserable disease left in the wake of the war. Furthermore, pockets of archenemy resistance persist. Tribal groups, loyal to the Arcanate, remain widespread, engaged in acts of resistance and insurgency on worlds as far to trailwards as Miriand and Lodius. Though the Anarch is dead and his forces shattered, fleeing remnants survive. Unable to rejoin Gor's host in the Irenes group, choose to burn out their lives by raiding and spreading terror. The recent uprising on Zadok shows us that the influence of the archenemy is like a splinter in our flesh, hard to dig out and be rid of. In this way, Makarov has shown insight. Though his main force drives across the Irenes line to subjugate and finally annihilate the foe, he has reserved many units and fleet groups for consolidation work, moving across the inner systems to provide support and, where necessary, suppression. Makarov's Sabbath victory will not be in name alone. He intends not merely to put the fire out, but to hunt down and grind down any embers or sparks so that evil may never reignite in the region. The Warmaster has codenamed his final offensive Operation Carnodon, and Departamento Tactica sources confirm his principal objectives are Harkonnen and Nostos, along with the relief of Eric's battle group at Kilgrave. We may conjecture that the Warmaster means to draw the Gor out, breaking his line of reinforcements through Nostos and perhaps trapping him in an annihilating action at Harkonnen or Loras. It is felt he favours Harkonnen, for he, like his successor Slado, understands the significance of legacy. Harkonnen was the world where Saint Sabbath's original Great Crusade ended with her martyrdom after 105 years of conflict around 625 M35. Harkonnen is a holy world, sacred to our heritage, which Makarov has sworn to retake, and it would be just and fitting if the vile Gor met his end there. A key concern among Imperial observers is the consequence of Anarch Sek's death. Although the loss of the Gor's chief lieutenant warlord and the dissipation of his host is a considerable weakening blow to the Arcanate, leaving as it does the Gor alone and the war reduced to one front, many fear the Gor's stubborn and aggressive mentality. It is simply unknown what military reserves he may be able to draw from the sanguinary tribal regions, or how other tribal and cult factions may respond to the turn of the tide. Sek's death is a crippling blow to the Arcanate. The obvious sequel to that is the destruction of the Gor and thus the toppling of the Arcanate entire. Tribal factions that have been so far unwilling to side with Gor because of their rivalry with Sek's Shadowmetakian loyalties may now feel empowered to join with the Gor's ranks. Other tribal groupings with historical enmity towards the Gorate clans may put aside their old differences and stand with the Gor, simply to maintain the integrity of the Arcanate. Imperial Xenosavants express particular fears of the Harrow-kin, Hagmata and Duradata in the former regard, and the Weish and Lapida Bail in the latter. The Arcanate has been grievously weakened by the Urdesh victory, but, like a wounded animal, it may react with unexpected and frenzied venom in an effort to preserve itself, now that it is cornered. Aquilus, an operation conducted as part of the consolidation efforts, seeks to identify and target these potential sub-targets before they can swing their support to the Archon's cause. Weishist sympathizers have been suppressed and annihilated in the Khan group, and Hagmata insurgents driven from their strongholds on 2 Cabal systems. 3 further Sabbatine tribal unions, the Sharath, the Lankramata, and the Ainting, have pledged allegiance to the Imperial cause after decades of neutrality, and have joined the primary front groups as troop auxiliaries. The petition of a 4th, the Haltine Locus, are being considered subject to investigation by the Holy Ordos. Though the Heltine, a subclan quite common to the Corwood portions of the Sabbath worlds, have never taken up arms during the Crusade, or indeed at any recorded point before that, they are known to hold certain belief systems in common with Bashribi and Wayish tribe structures, and may yet be ruled heretically. In addition to the far spinward rim of the region, at Zoa, rumours spread of a militarised build-up by the Arnos Chasmata, though commentators believe this is an effort by the tribal group to defend its ancestral territory against retreating Gorite forces rather than to contest imperial pacification. At this time, Crusade Aquilas divisions are waging anti-insurgency campaigns on 9 inner worlds, including Zamir, Armadrona, and Moorland. It is clear that, between ferocious open war at the front line and insurgency actions within the home systems, the great populace of the Sabbath worlds faces still more years of privation and bloodshed before peace can prevail. But the finality is upon us, and the endgame of the Sabbath world's crusade has assuredly begun. We must trust in the providence of the God Emperor, and the fortitude of the War Master, his Lords Militant, and his Lord Executor Gaunt, champion of our great Urdesh, to deliver us. The Emperor protects. In the name of Terra, let us remain resolute to the last, and let the Sabbath worlds be freed. Well, there we have it. Finally finished. After all those nearly 3 years since I started this series, it is finally done. And for those of you who aren't aware, newcomers to the channel, this was the start of my YouTube efforts, the Gaunt's Ghost series. And I got distracted and, life gets in the way. But mostly I just got distracted by other stuff. So what I will say is I have included within the description and as a comment, a pinned comment, I will do anyway, link to the playlist of Gaunt's Ghosts. Now, some of the quality of it isn't quite where I am now, if you think this is good. It's definitely below that. But if you are interested in seeing the whole Gaunt's Ghost series, the quality isn't there, but I think the information is definitely there. I think I've done a good job with this series, and I'm quite happy with how it's turned out, all in all. One of the Vervenhive videos, I probably could have done better, but anyway, it's a 10-part series. Some of the episodes are only quite short, and then they get progressively longer as I sort of find my way on YouTube and how to do stuff. But I hope you do enjoy that, and definitely follow the link. I'm just saying this because some people, I think, are unaware that this is part 10 of a series, and that's my own fault. Now, going forward, I have got big plans for some fairly large lore series concerning different things. I haven't fully decided what yet. I'm still trying to work it out in my mind. But rest assured, I will not do to you what I did with the Gaunt series here. Everything will be written out in advance, recorded in advance most likely, and then will come out on a weekly basis. And yeah, it'll be a proper campaign series, in depth. Potentially a Tau-related series, maybe Damocles Gulf, maybe something else, I'm not sure just yet. But I have some bigger histories coming as well. One on Dante is coming very soon, and I'll be continuing to work on stuff as we go forward. Thank you to everybody supporting the channel. You can see all your names here. Some of you guys have been here since the very start, so I'm sure you get some satisfaction in seeing the end of the Gaunt's Ghost series, and you've been supporting me since then, so thank you. Thank you. And to everybody supporting the channel, dudes, I really appreciate it. It means a lot. I know some of the stuff I put out isn't always what people want, and I apologise for that, but I try and do my best to do what I enjoy, thinking that you'll enjoy it as well. Because if I try and do stuff that I'm not too into, I think it'll come through and I wouldn't do a good job of it. So I'm trying my best to just do something I enjoy that I know you guys will enjoy, if you follow me. But anyway, if you want to support the channel, you can follow the links below, either on Patreon or become a YouTube member. Don't worry as well, because I've had messages from people saying, times are tough, I can't support you anymore and whatever. I will in a few weeks or whatever. That's cool. That's completely cool. I will not be an arsehole to you. I'm not that way. If you support the channel and you can't anymore, don't worry about it. There's more important things in life. But for those who do, thank you very much. But yeah, if you need to stop, don't worry, it's fine. And yeah, that's it really. This is to get all sentimental. I'll finish this up because I'm just ranting there. I'll finish this up now. To get all sentimental on you. I started my YouTube stuff with the Gaunt's Ghost series because I love the series. And I always have, and it's one of the first books I ever read, really, a novel I ever read when I was younger. And, which is sad to say, isn't it? But it could have been worse, it could have been Harry Potter. Anyway, I read all these, and they're great series, and they're really fun, and they've still remained fun, even to this, to the current day. And at the time, obviously, Gaunt's Ghost was a bit forgotten because it had been a fair few years since anything had been released from them for various reasons. Dan Abnett now has pulled it out the bag with the last two. They weren't to everybody's cup of tea, but for me, as a history person, it was great to see the sort of generals knocking around and the completion of a number of plot threads. Some of them didn't quite work for me, but it was a good series, a good sort of climax to that arc of the series. And I'm looking forward to more, but I don't expect to have any more Gaunt's Ghost for the next couple of years, probably. It's going to be a good 2 or 3 years. As and when those come, I will do another episode of this. So it isn't really the end. It's more just as far as I can go with it. So more will come as we get more Gaunt's Ghosts stuff. And I just don't know when that's going to happen. But I'm guessing 2 or 3 years away, I suppose. Hopefully. Dan Abnett wrote this series, and it's one of his biggest series. I know Eisenhorn is more popular, and especially when the TV show comes, if it comes, assuming it comes, it looks like it is going to come. Assuming that comes along, that will become even more popular. But this is the one he really did the first job on building this world, this universe. And again, as I've said many times, the Gaunt's Ghost universe is so formulative to how 40k has gone since this book came out. So much of it has been integrated into the sort of wider context of the lore. Just little things about how guardsmen live, how they eat, how they entertain themselves, how they talk to each other, how Imperial Guard regiments function and stuff. Some of that stuff, it was either really vague or it didn't exist at all. So this is a great series. I highly recommend it. You can start getting them on Audible now. I know people ain't into Audible, everybody, but, I recommend it. And I've got a link below as well, hint, hint. But if you use that, you can go and get a Gaunt's Ghost novel. They're going through the old ones now, giving them Audible versions. I'm not sure on the quality. Some people have said the quality isn't quite there. I don't know, I can't comment. But if you're going to pick up the physical books, I definitely recommend it. It's a great series and so big, you'll get such an enjoyment out of it. The first couple of books are a little bit ropey, but he definitely gets into his stride by book 3. Quality stuff. Definitely recommend. Anyway, I'm going to stop ranting now because I've been ranting a while. Thanks again, everybody, and thanks for you guys who came over watching this. And again, I apologise it took so long. The next ones won't, so don't fear. But I'll be back again with more stuff soon. Please remember to like the video. Let me know in the comments what you thought. And remember to subscribe if you're not subscribed. I'll be back soon. Thank you all very much for carry on watching. I don't know what you do. I'm glad you do, but I just don't get it still. But I'm glad it offers some entertainment to you, and I hope a distraction, and I hope you enjoy it. So I'll be back again soon. I'm going to go now. Seriously. Bye-bye.
Yo, Midge, what's up, bro? Thanks for rolling through, G. I was mid reading chats with my mic off on accident. Whoops. Nah, dude. So what's up, 51? You're gonna be fishing until you pass out? Hell yeah. I do need Silk Touch, but if it's... I don't want to... If it's low, I don't want to use it if it's low. And if you fixed it... You want to just like... maybe leave it somewhere close by?
Tamukan, the throne of chaos. Honored masters, Likmar Vanek is dead. I have the pleasure to report that the renegade, whose continued life has long been a thorn in the side of our most august college, is no more. I took his life personally, following a battle just outside the village of Gunatag between his own forces, a mixture of degenerate cultists and duped villagers for the main, who he had suborned and corrupted under the alias of a witch hunter, come to rid them of the very ruinous powers he in truth so willingly served. My army, such as it was formed from a contingent of the state troops from the nearby fort at Bragenhall and such mercenaries and zealots as I could stir up given the time. The battle itself was hardly the largest I have seen, but was bitterly contested and left the locality desolate and Gunnetarg itself in flames, an outcome perhaps for the best, given the vile proclivities of Vanek and his followers. The renegade himself I caught attempting to flee the field, after the disciplined fire of Bragenhal's handgunners had finally turned the affair in our favour, and his own untamed conjurations had turned upon him in misrule. It was with some satisfaction that I called upon the power of Olgu to beset him and strangled him to death with the darkness of the very thorn thicket in which he sought to flee. Afterwards, I had his body incinerated under the normal precautionary measures and set about the task of doing the same for his lair, which I had discovered in the cellars of the profaned shrine to Sigmar within the village. Here, along with the expected foul paraphernalia of the cult master, I uncovered a number of strange and forbidden manuscripts,
Thanks, bro.
which no doubt constituted the sorcerer's arcane library of sorts. Among those were widely known blasphemous texts and tomes, such as von Hunt's Demon Alatria and the Red Fragments.
Yeah, I got to get some fishing in.
Chahambra,
Also, I want to get
the Man,
mending.
and others that I
Mending.
shall not trouble to name, was a most singular and curious manuscript I have not encountered before, bearing the eponymous title of Tamokhan, or the Throne of Chaos. This strange work, extensive in range and strangely illuminated.
So what's the best thing to put
takes
mending
as
on
its subject
first?
the rise and fall
Silk
of the great
touch
warlord of the
or
northern wastes,
fortune?
vaguely known to imperial scholars as having led a savage invasion of the Empire's southern lands nearly a decade
If you have
ago, and to the
fortune
great sorrow and desolation
with
of Weazenland.
hold on. If you have
The work
fortune, wait,
purports at
fortune
least to have
silk
been
touch
penned
with
by one
mending.
actually within the ranks of the great and
Silk
foul
touch.
host.
If I have
And as
fortune
such,
with
I do not need
mending,
to stress upon you,
do I
honoured
ever need
masters,
silk
its
touch?
rarity or potential importance if genuine. The great foe is one whose malevolence we must suffer time and again, just as the hurricanes lash the isles of the western seas, and like those great storms, to those that cling precariously to life in the sunlands, we know that each fresh calamity could be the end of us. Yet still we endure, the Empire endures, and long may it do so. This strange manuscript, then, could be of supreme significance, for it deals with events and peoples in the dark and terrible lands, far removed from our own, yet where many of our troubles are.
At Pechanga Resort Casino in Temecula, you can stay and play, wine and dine. Soar.
Excuse me.
And N. The doom of the great Kurgan. It was said that in ancient days, before even the great wall of the East was raised, or hammer-handed Sigmar rose in the verdant lands of the Reich, that there grew in the East, beyond the mountains of Morn, the mighty empire of Kurgan, whose cruel dominion covered the vast steppe lands and ranged wide, an empire of swift horsemen, snarling beasts and dread sorceries, that struck down its foe swifter than any arrow, and whose warriors' blades were ever wetted with blood. So mighty was this empire without fortress or border, that its ruler was known only as the Great Kurgan, for his domain was naught but an extension of his will. By war and conquest, the Great Kurgan gathered all of that vast and warlike race that bore his name beneath his yoke. Those who opposed him he crushed utterly. Those who threw themselves prostrate before his feet he made slaves. Only the mighty did he deem worthy to recruit into the ranks of his vast host, and only before the gods of chaos did he kneel. With a never-ending hunger for power over the steppe lands and their people, the Great Kurgan prayed to the winds of the north, south, east, and west. He prayed to the earth and to the sky and to the rain. He prayed to the sun by day, and by night to the moon, and to the black moon that followed in its wake. He gave up many offerings of captives and plunder. The great Kurgan was mighty, but he knew the forces that ruled the insane realms of the uttermost north were mightier yet, and so in pact with them he became bound, and power they had given him, and in his due he would not falter. The great Kurgan had many wives, but they had borne him only 4 sons, 4 brothers who were fierce rivals for their father's favour and the glory of conquest, sons who had now come of age, sons promised to the Chaos Gods. One day the great Kurgan drew his sons to him, saying, "My sons, it has pleased the gods to give me dominion over all the lands of the Kurgan and far beyond. My realm runs far, and my conquests have been many. Mighty armies of men, orcs and dwarves I have driven before me, and I have heaped their dead in piles as high as the mountains to attest to my glory in the realms beyond. Never before have the Kurgan known such greatness, nor such glory in battle, and our name alone now strikes fear into the hearts of the world." The sons of the great Kurgan cheered, for they were eager to shed the blood of their father's enemies, whoever they might be. But at that
Yo,
moment,
Francois, are you still
within
there,
the tent
dude?
city of the Kurgan, a storm erupted to quell
He's,
their laughter. The
That color
harrowing
suggestion
wind
is
assailed
looking
the
all right.
Kurgan multitude, bringing with it strange scents of blood, rot, perfume, and scorching fire. At this omen, all cast themselves upon the ground in obeisance, be they warrior, sorcerer, or slave, for the Chaos Gods were at hand. In the tent of the great Kurgan, banners and trophies were cast contemptuously down, and the 4 sons were struck dumb with fear as their father fell to his knees, knowing it was time to pay the heavy price that had been set by the Chaos Gods for his victories. Casting a bitter look upon his precious sons, he said, "But for each bargain there is a price, and it is the God's pleasure to take from a man what he most treasures, though he might not know its value before it is too late. And now I must pay my dues." The tent city was suddenly filled with the minions of the dark gods in all their endless variety. Demons came then, cavorting and savage, demons of rot and slaughter, demons of excess and transformation, come to collect their due for a bargain paid in full. The greater gods of chaos took the great Kurgan's sons from him, 4 souls screaming as each was transfigured with the stigmata of each of the great Kurgan's patrons. Khorne, gore-clad lord of battle, Nurgle, corrupt father of plagues, Slanesh, prince of fell pleasures, and Tzeentch, the changer of the ways. With his only sons taken, the great Kurgan shed no tears, but raised up his skull chalice in thanksgiving to his masters, even though from that day after every victory would be a hollow one for him, and every pleasure would taste of ashes. The bargain complete, the fickle gods turned their attentions elsewhere, and met the great Kurgan's prayers with cold silence. Although still mighty, an ill-omened shade now befell the great Kurgan, and men whispered dark things at his passing, and warriors made offerings to the gods after his shadow fell over them to avoid his curse. Soon, with no bloodline to follow him, intrigue and murder grew rife among his chieftains and sorcerers, each vying for their own glory and power. Now his succession was marked as ended. So it was that in a handful of years did the great Kurgan see his vaunted empire
thank you,
fall
bro.
to ruin, its glory trampled into the dust. And when the great Kurgan finally fell, none would speak of his final fate. And, as he became all but forgotten, a fireside legend among the men of the North. But, as for his 4 sons, given over to the winds of chaos, it was said that the gods had other plans for their playthings, and in time, each would have a fitting doom of their own. The tribes of chaos. The vast and desolate steppeland and rocky wastes of the far north are, despite their bleak and barren appearance, far from uninhabited. In addition to the scattered tribes of orcs, savage trolls, and all manner of strange beasts and unnatural horrors, they are, first and foremost, home to many ancient, semi-nomadic clans and tribes of humans, known chiefly in the old world as the Marauders of Chaos. These are a fierce, warlike people, and although there exists marked differences in appearances and culture between their individual tribes, they are, without exception, savage-hearted and touched by chaos, both in body and soul. Only the strong prosper amongst their kind, as war, hardship, and continuous danger of living so close to the literal edge of chaos take their toll and winnow out the weak and foolish early on. Raised to survive in this harsh environment, there is no man nor woman of the northern tribes that reaches adulthood without having become inured to violence and horror, and who is not fully prepared and skilled enough to take another's life, either for gain, honour, or the glory of the Chaos Gods. To them, the folk of the southern lands are weak and self-deluded wretches who place value in petty godlings and follies of stone that they believe will protect them from the oncoming storm. The common folk of other lands are to them nothing but snivelling cowards who kneel to their masters, not to the strong by right of arms, but because they are little more than cattle, slaves in their souls to their soft priests and the demands of their grasping liar kings and lords, and therefore deserve no better than to be crushed by the strong. To the tribes of the north, be they of raven-haired Kurgan, the pale-skinned Norskans, or the lithe Hung, power and might is all, and that a man or woman may carve such a legend for themselves that may be remembered in story and gain the favour of the dark gods is their greatest desire. Beyond the often tenuous links of tribal affiliation, family and bloodline, they have little concept of allegiance to state or nation, and certainly no loyalty save that which they have given freely to a warlord or champion. These ties are strengthened only through victory and clear sign of the favour of the gods, and will swiftly evaporate if they are defeated or their commander shows any sign of weakness. Even within their own tribal groups, they will often fight to the death over slights to their honour, petty insults, whether perceived or real, or simply to test and prove their martial prowess. They are a nomadic people who care little for borders and simply take what they want from other lands if they are strong enough to do so, be it by longship raids in the case of the Norse, or under thunderous hooves as their tribes ride into battle, sweeping across the steppe like a great swarm of locusts. Despite all of this, and the inhuman savagery their reputation speaks of in more civilized lands, the Marauders of the North are still human, and the differences between them and the southern folk of the old world and far Cathay are paltry compared to, say, a human and an elf or orc. And the wise know them not as some separate race, but as merely a dark reflection of what lies in all men's hearts, the desire to conquer and survive despite all odds. The true difference, then, lies in the shadow of chaos that swallows their lives, customs and beliefs like a shroud. In the north, in the shadowed lands that lie within the grasp of the realm of chaos, the dark and ruinous gods of chaos, and the sanity-blasting, flesh-warping influence of raw magic is as real and accepted a force in men's lives as wind and rain, birth and death. They are both undeniable and indefatigable. To live under their gaze is to know the world remade anew, in nightmare, at the whim of demons, and to see all sense of permanency or control swept aside to satiate the appetites of the Chaos Gods and their myriad petty rivalries and insidious games, played out with mankind as their favoured and chief gaming pieces. Confronted with such malign omnipotence, the tribes of the north are both fearful and devout, and seek to propitiate and gain the favour of the gods with appropriate sacrifices and deeds carried out in their honour, so to gain their favour, or at least mollify their spite. In doing so, the strength of their belief and emotions complete the circle and sustain the Chaos Gods in power. The vast majority of those men and women live and die under the shadow of chaos worship and revere each of the four greater powers, Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh and Tzeentch in turn, as well as lesser and more numerous demons and spirits of chaos to whom they have connections by bloodline, history, pact or place. Thusly, might a warrior pray to Khorne, the blood god, for prowess in victory and in battle, offer up sacrifice to Nurgle, the desolate one, in time of famine or plague, or to afflict their enemies, Slaanesh, the decadent, for plunder, and for fulsome feasting and celebration in victory, and to Tzeentch for cunning, and that the rage of storm and sea might submit to their will. Every facet of the world and life belongs in some way to one of the gods of chaos, and there are many among the tribes of the north who account it suicidal folly to spurn one of the great powers their due. There are, however, some who claim the patronage of a single chaos god, disavowing worship of all others in the name of a single supreme master, and in return, and should their hellish divinity find them worthy, they may be granted the boon of an unholy pact which empowers and harnesses but the merest sliver of their god's might and nature. But this alone is enough to set them apart from other men in strength and unnatural abilities. Such a pact is a perilous one, for as power is given, so too is great risk, and the dark path of such devotion can lead to the warrior being entirely consumed, body and soul, either becoming little more than a hollow extension of Chaos's immortal will, or physically devolving into a mutated, mindless spawn. The greatest of these zealous devotees and God-sworn warriors will rise to become the champions of chaos, warrior lords and sorcerers whose power and skill is all but unmatched in the world, peerless killers and conquerors whose burning desire for dominion and ascendancy is fueled and amplified by the immortal fury of the Chaos Gods. Theirs is the will and fame that gathers the marauders and warriors of the north into armies of such mettle that the world trembles at their tread. Theirs is the gaze that quells the hearts of beast and spawn alike, and theirs is the favour of the gods, such that even demonkind is theirs to command. It is these Chaos Lords alone that have the ability to wield the disparate and warlike tribes and nomadic warbands of the wastes into ravaging armies, numbering in the thousands and even tens of thousands, folding within their ranks giants, trolls, ogres, and other beasts too singular and horrific to have a common name. In doing so, they may forge a force strong enough to challenge the very existence of the empires of the old world. Then they pour down from the north, to threaten every land and realm, bringing with them raw madness and merciless destruction in attacks some scholars know as the Great Incursions, which occur when the power of chaos waxes strong. Yet even for these few chosen sons and daughters, the path is a treacherous one, for while each may dream of gaining the Chaos God's ultimate and rarest gift, immortality in the incarnation of a demon prince, most will succumb to a glorious death in battle and damnation, or even betrayal by their own. Chapter 1. Blind I am, who was once far in sight and swift in malice, cursed and punished, to recount not mine own glory and mine own tragedies, but the glories and terrible sagas of others who have borne the bloody blade of champion before the great gods of chaos. It is I, their chronicler, alone who may tell their tales, spilling their secrets with my viper's tongue and burning venomed ink. For those with the wisdom to see and the wit to tell steel-edged truth from honeyed lie. Beware, for such knowledge is as treacherous as the path to greatness in the service of chaos itself. Know then that this is the saga of Tamarkan, Maggot Lord, son of the great Kurgan of old, favoured of Nurgle, warlord, tyrant, canker, worm, and false king. Tamarkan the Great, Tamarkan the Fool, pawn of prophecy and bringer of slaughter. Tamarkan, he who sought the throne of chaos. In the year of the Crow, in the 6th reign of the Black Moon, by the Norscan reckoning, the never-ending tempest that crowns the storm that is known to men as the realm of chaos waxed gibbous and grasping. All across the Northlands the earth shifted and moaned, as if it were a sleeper beset by nightmares. Battle graves vomited forth their unquiet dead, and she-beast and mortal woman alike were greatly blessed with the taint of chaos.
Get the Alley sofa for $4.95. Only at
Living Spaces.
Eager into the minds of those with the wit to seize them. War was coming, as it had countless times before, and would do so countless times again. Red War, the likes of which every Northman, be they Dalgon, Chian, or Khazag, feels the calling of in their bones and cannot resist. War at the pleasure of the Chaos Gods. With the call to battle tugging at their minds and souls, some wasted no time in falling first upon their own, striving in bloody combat to prove their worth before their tribe and their gods for the battle to come. Others, tormented by dreams and visions, quested alone, travelling ever northward to where the world itself was ripped apart. Of these dark pilgrims, some found paths to bleak and nightmarish shrines, where they came to claim a blessing and pledge their allegiance to one of the great powers, while many merely found death. Feeling the breath of chaos at their neck and hearing its honeyed whispers of promises of their ascendancy and destruction in equal measure, many exalted champions and would-be warlords across the Northlands bestirred themselves for battle. For some, the prospect of fighting familiar foes and settling ancient feuds was enough to call on their savagery and spur them to action alone, while others, superstitious and pious in their dark religion, sought the favour of the gods by divining prophecies and the calling of demonic summonings for law and guidance as to where their blow should fall. Fickle and contradictory are the gods of chaos, and treacherous their demon kin. For each visitation and augury was a different answer given, and for each a different path to glory illuminated. Yet within the cacophony of maddening lies, lick-spittled truths and burning secrets, there were names and whispers that reverberated and echoed time and again to some, of the ever-chosen, yet to rise, of Zambijan, the fallen city, the Serpent's Moon and the dead Grail of the Knights of Fire and Ash, and of the Throne of Chaos, of undying dominion over the mortal world in demon flesh, a prize ripe for the taking. So it came to pass, in the Kurgan lands where the legends of the blasted plateau of Kadatha and the ancient ruins of Zambijan that surmounted it were well known, that many warlords and mighty champions of chaos were drawn to quest for its cold heights. Although said to exist somewhere to the east, the Kadatha was also known to shift and wane like a mirage on the horizon, and an unfavoured warrior might be driven mad or starve without ever reaching it, although it hovered on the horizon before them. But now, as the realm of chaos waxed in power, the great plateau of blasted Kadatha lay open for any that would dare climb the razor-sharp rocks of its passes to give battle in the shadow of the ancient ruins at its summit. Zambijan, the fallen city, was older than man, and had long served as an arena where the Chaos Gods watched their mortal followers vie for their favour in violent combat. When the champions and their armies came to battle here, each hoped to prove their worth and the superiority of their patron over all others, and now would be no exception. A champion who was a victor here would be marked for greatness, and by ancient tradition become master of those they vanquished. The fame of such a warlord would spread throughout the northern wastes, and many would flock to their banner in promise of the glories to come. Eventually, 3 mighty armies came to make war in the shadow of the timeless twisted pillars of Zambijan. First from the west came the brazen armoured warriors of Haka the Aisling, his axemen drawn up in brutal column, each accompanied by packs of blood-crazed, gore-spawn and flayed hounds snapping at their leashes. From the east came Sargaf the Vain, horse lord of the Yurzak, at whose bequest the paramours of Slanesh danced. Sargaf, though but young in years, was already a legend among his people, and his marauders and horse-mounted reavers were legion in number, and weighed down with unnatural appetites that hungered to be satiated. From the south came the witch cabal of Uruk Solbane, arch-sorcerer and demon-priest, at whose beckoning the earth and rocks themselves spat forth twisted killing shapes, and above whose head vultures whirled on wings of flame. Although comparatively few compared to the other greater forces, the witch cult was deadly, and its fanatic acolytes and sorcerers could match many times their own number in combat. Soon battle was joined, and the slaughter was great. By spell and sword, fanged maw and burning talon, lives were claimed and blood was shed in profusion for the gods' pleasure. The dead plazas of the fallen city echoed once more to the song of steel and the piteous cries of the dying. Hour after hour, day after day, the forces clashed and parted in the heartbeat rhythm of war.
Thanks,
of the 3
dude.
forces, none gained
Yeah, bro.
the upper
No,
hand.
hey, I was
While
saying a
the
minute ago
fury
if you
of
were still
Haka's
here, I was
berserkers
all,
was
bro,
unsurpassed,
Francois, are you still
it was
here?
countered
Hey,
by the
this
numbers
looks
of
good, dude.
Sargaf's vast
Thanks for
host,
the
who
thanks for
spitted
the tips,
themselves
bro.
on
Hold
their foes'
Look,
blades in
look.
unholy bliss and dragged them down,
Like, look
only
at the
to be
back.
beaten back from victory in turn by the scouring
back
hellfire
muscles.
of Uruk's witch cabal, striking when triumph seemed assured. Each force grew more desperate for victory as the bodies stacked deep in the cold dust, as the moon
looks sick as
passed
fuck,
overhead,
bruh.
and a great tumult of baleful light caught hold in the skies above Kadaver.
Like, every time I'm done,
Both
like,
as a sign
doing
of the
a little
god's
more
pleasure,
dry
as a
brushing, I
beacon
was all,
to draw
damn,
in
dude, this looks
others with the
good.
promise
I
of
mean, it doesn't look
glory
like
like
amazing,
moths to a
amazing, but for
flame.
me, it
The
looks
fighting
damn good.
ran on unabated, and soon, where thousands had battled before,
But
tens
I'll
of
do a
thousands
green
now
wash
flocked
over,
to join the conflict.
yeah, a green
Both
wash over it. For sure.
swelling the armies.
But I think I'll do it next week
mighty
because I'm
champions who already fought,
getting a
and
little
adding
tired
roll
of painting
call
here.
of petty warlords, hungering creatures of chaos and their followers as minor
But
factions into the fray.
this came out good, dude.
When the moon of Mansleib died in the east, and the black moon, Morsleib, rose in the ascendancy, another host appeared on the horizon, carrying with it a great miasma of shadow and pestilence. It had begun as a flood of distorted, nightmarish beings, dredged from the depths of the cold mires, hungering bile trolls, worm men, and hideous nameless things dripping rot and slime. At the head of this monstrous horde was a rotted yet living cadaver astride a mighty toad dragon, a huge beast that shook the earth with each bloated stride it took. The cadaver that called itself
bro.
Tamakan,
Thanks, dude.
the maggot lord, servant of the god of pestilence and father of all diseases, Nurgle. Like the other chaos warlords, Tamarkan had been drawn to Kedatha by the promises of power beyond mortal imagining. But from the beginning, he was amongst the four who had been marked for glory by his patron god. As Tamarkan had set out from his fetid lair, the Lord of Decay, the great and pestilent god Nurgle himself, had sent forth a dark and noxious storm that howled and screamed before
this is how we learn,
the
right?
rancid column of beasts and half-men he commanded, carrying the certain promise of death and ruin to follow. Whilst the moon had dwindled in the night sky, the horde of Tamarkan wound ever westward towards blasted Kedatha, where battle already raged. Drawn in his wake were many fierce warriors who owed fealty to the corrupt father of plagues, heedless of loyalty to tribe or warband. So highly blessed in Father Nurgle's favour, Tamarkan clearly was. From all the domains of the Northlands, champions of decay clamoured to the cavalcade of their new master, and soon names already legend for the desolation they had wrought, such as Kaizak the Befouled,
For the green
master
wash, is
of
it
an
going to be
order of
like a
corrupt and rotted chaos
dark
knights,
green
and the
wash
dragon
or
rider
light green wash?
Orbel Vipergut came to pledge to him their filth-stained blades in allegiance. With every great warrior of renown came also a host of lesser fighters, tribesmen and subhuman dregs in profusion, and in places known for pestilence and corruption, so many flocked to join the horde of Tamarkan that where they marched, the land was emptied by the cry to war. Most of those who rallied to the ragged banners of Nurgle were already marked by the rank favours of their patron lord, the god of plague, and some were so corrupted by disease and disfigurement they were barely recognisable as the broken remnants of men, yet all were eager to serve in their fashion. Tamarkan's coming to blasted Kedatha was heralded by dark signs and portents, and even as his mouldering host mounted the passes to the plateau, the dead of battle that littered fallen Zanbijan started to shudder and seethe with unholy life. Not, though, the dark animation of necromancy, but with huge, bloated carrion flies that had bred in the rotted organs of the dead. The juddering corpses now burst forth in a hateful biting swarm to cloud the skies in sickly clouds, and fill the fallen city with their murmurous wing beats. With this foul omen at hand, the witch cult of Uruk Solbane, Arcanist of Zench, fled Zanbijan, spitting burning curses in their wake, their master having divined of doom should he stay to fight, for the arch-enemy's hour was at hand. For the bitter rivals Sargath and Haka, and many of the rest caught up in the conflict, however, nothing could stay their enmity. Even the coming of this fourth host to contest the city and the hellish swarms of biting flies that preceded it. So it was that Tamarkan's plague-ridden host fell upon the two greater armies as they were already engaged in bloody battle for the wide plaza at the centre of the dead city. The slaughter was great, and swiftly many of the minor warbands were crushed or driven from the field in disarray, and those not trapped between warring factions or blinded by bloodlust took to flight rather than risk overwhelming destruction, while Sargath's and Haka's forces fought on unbowed. At the height of the battle, the skies were rent open and foul and caustic rain fell in great sheets. At the tainted rain's touch, the flesh of the dead petrified and ran like melting wax, and open wounds festered as the vanguards of the three great warlords met in battle at the plaza's centre. The proud and vicious steeds of the Yurtzak marauders were soon mired and lamed as obscene tendrils of rancid liquid rose up to drag them down to drown within the horrific mass, as the horde of Tamarkan smashed into their flank with shattering force. The embattled combatants turned and counterattacked this new enemy, and pox-scarred madmen screamed their misery and joy as they fell while bloated demons droned the count of the dead and the dying. Sargath's sworn sorcerers responded with twisting enchantments of their own, searing the oncoming plague beasts with pavanes of coruscating energy, blinding and misleading its warriors with murderous illusions. But all was in vain as the disordered lines of Sargath's marauders and cavalry, caught in place and robbed of the strength of mobility, crumbled before the implacable tide of rot and terror before them, while Sargath's most powerful troops, his mutant Forsaken, were caught between the onslaught of Kaizak the Befouled Chaos Knights on one side and the frenzied, flayed hounds of Hakka's forces, who had been driven utterly insane by the corrosive rain and devouring flies on the other. Seeing the tide of battle turned against him, Sargath, his pride stung and his rage uncontrollable,
Yeah, you guys. I think we're gonna end it right here. But I think we did all right. We did well. We did good. We got a couple of homies done with a little help from my friends. Wouldn't be possible without viewers like you. Yeah, dude. Thank you guys for being here, for hanging out, for chilling. Tomorrow, you guys, will be back for some Stargate watch party. 3 episodes, some special features. Thursday, maybe we'll do some more painting on Thursday. And hopefully I'll feel like some Dark Tide. And let's see, Friday we got a movie. Not too sure exactly which movie, but you'll see.
You'll see.
And then Saturday, you guys, we'll probably play some games. Maybe fill in some games here and there. Sunday, not too sure. And probably nothing Sunday. But Monday, we'll be back to the cartoon watch party. Tuesday, some more painting. And we'll see how it goes. Everybody that was here, that hung out, thank you guys for being here, for chilling, relaxing, maxing. Francois, Area 51, Mitch, Zonex, Vietnamese Style, Bad Vibes, Bella Truth. Everybody that rolled on through, thank you guys. I'll be back before you guys know it. Francois, thanks for the tips on the painting. It's looking good, dude. Thank you. And I'll catch you guys here soon and on the next one. Oh, whoops. Hold on. Soon and on the next one. Alright, I'll see you guys later. Peace.